conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Wednesday, May 3rd, 2023. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Ian Millhiser, senior correspondent at Vox, on the corruption of the Supreme Court, and also on this Looper Bright Enterprises Raimondo case, Chevron doctrine, really the administrative state hanging in the balance. We'll talk about mifepristone. We'll talk about Groff v. DeJoy, Glacier Northwest, a case that could seriously inhibit the ability of unions to strike, and more. Also on the program today, Democrats looking to outflank Republicans on the debt ceiling fight. First with parliamentary tricks, and then maybe with just ignoring the whole debt ceiling. Meanwhile, it is day 2. National television and film writers strike. Give you a sense of where that might be going. The Fed meets today amidst slower inflation and mounting evidence that corporate profits have been the primary inflation culprit. Yet still, labor undoubtedly will be disciplined. Dianne Feinstein supposedly coming back to the Senate next week. Don't hold your breath. We're number 1, ladies and gentlemen. U.S. mass killings on a record pace in 2023. This as while Texas teaches 8-year-olds, quote, battlefield trauma care. Got more time since they don't allow sex ed in Texas.
No reconstruction.
Texas Republicans also primed to pass legislation to overturn elections exclusively in one of its bluest counties in the state. Fox supposedly shocked to find Tucker Carlson a white nationalist in texts. Don't believe it. Do not believe. They are shocked at all. Judge rejects Zoe Zephyr's bid to return to the Montana House floor, stating the judge has no authority. Elon Musk threatens to allow impersonation of NPR on Twitter. And New York State passes the most significant green energy bill in the country, perhaps in the history of the country. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for joining us. It is, Emma is out today, and as such, I will do the honors, unless anybody else has paid the licensing fee. Matt, Bradley?
Nope, I'm not giving tribute to that monopoly.
I'll be sued.
It's Hump Day, ladies and gentlemen. Yes. We have made it through exactly half the week. Exactly half of your work week is now done, assuming you work on, Monday through Friday. If you work on the weekends, then...
Yeah, noon on Wednesday is the halfway point.
Noon on Wednesdays is really the absolute halfway point. And just a ton of news, frankly. A ton of stories to go through. We're not going to get to all of them today. But we're doing our, we are getting closer. It is May. Within a month and a half, we will have, within 2 months for sure, we will have all of the decisions of the Supreme Court. Wanted to tee up a couple of them for you with Ian Millhiser later in a moment. DC letter carrier said, did you see your friend Patrick Bet David offered Tucker Carlson a $50 million deal? I think it was a $50 million or was it $100 million? I thought it was $100 million for 4 years plus some participation. Newsmax is also going to offer him a big deal. I mean,
yeah, 100 over 5.
100 million over 5 years. That's less than Tucker Carlson was making at Fox News, although I guess he also gets participation in the PBD universe. I mean, I will tell you this, that maybe Tucker Carlson takes that deal. I don't know why. Maybe he would. I mean, $100 million is nothing to sneeze at. I can tell you that I've never sneezed at that. But I will tell you this, that entity, Valuetainment Media, will not recoup that $100 million. This is the thing. Even, you look at like even Joe Rogan with Spotify. The reason why Spotify paid all that money to Joe Rogan was not because they felt that Joe Rogan could generate that money. They were going to take a loss on that. That's all well and good. What they were anticipating, and I don't know the success of it, I imagine it worked, was that they were going to bring enough eyeballs into the Spotify world that it would generate revenue across their entire offerings and provide it both in terms of like membership and in terms of advertising. I don't think Valuetainment Media has enough properties to benefit from however many eyeballs they end up bringing with Tucker Carlson. That's my opinion. There is a misconception. I think we're seeing the contraction of the podcast business, happen right in front of our eyes. These are low bar to entry businesses. And, one talent might be able to bring in people. You should turn down your mic because I'm hearing. One talent may be able to bring in a lot of people, but unless you have a lot of other mechanisms in which to monetize it, it's just not going to work. So, I'll tell you what, we will also issue an offer of, let's make it $200 million to Tucker Carlson. $200 million. People can report that, and we'll get the same benefit out of it as PBD does.
And it'll be for Tucker to teach us how to fight.
Exactly. I want him as my personal trainer. What a little prep school snotty kid. We'll talk about that too. Let me say this. Not only was Fox not shocked at what was in there, Fox did not just find this out when they claimed they did. They knew about this. This is all a lie. It's all a lie. I don't know why. I can speculate as to why they're trying to put out fake reasons why they fired Tucker Carlson. But what I'm really shocked about is the lack of skepticism by mainstream reporters. Like, you're not going to go after, like, why are they doing this? Why are they putting out this stuff? All right, maybe to embarrass Tucker Carlson, but they didn't fire him because they were so shocked to find out that's not the way white people Did they ever watch his show? But that's not even that. Well, I'll get into this later. But there's, even in the stories that report this, make it clear that they almost for sure knew that for sure that they found out about that text a long time ago. A long time ago. So this is, I don't buy it.
They were so taken aback it took them this long to act.
Yeah, I just don't buy it. I don't buy it. But we'll get into that. But just to tee up our conversation with Ian Millhiser about the corruption of the Supreme Court, This is an oldie but goodie, and that is Michael Mukasey. He was, and this is, when you get as old as I am now, you start to see things replay over and over again. When Bill Barr was nominated or was, raised to become Donald Trump's attorney general, every single mainstream media source that knew anything about this said, he's an old time Republican. He will bring some ethics and integrity to the position and calm Donald Trump. And he turned out to be just a maybe slightly more sophisticated, scumbag than Jeff Sessions. Honestly, when Alberto Gonzales was fired as George Bush's attorney general, and remember, this is like with the torture regime that took place and the unitary executive theory and all the things that were making people afraid that, Republican governance was completely out of control. They brought in Michael Mukasey and they said, this is an old time Republican. This is a guy who's really going to bring some semblance and balance. And Mukasey turned out to be almost identical to Bill Barr, just a more sophisticated version of doing the same things. He okayed the torture stuff. He okayed the unitary executive stuff. He was sort of deep into corruption. I think Rudy Giuliani. This guy was horrible. I don't know why he is brought in front of the Senate. Just the fact that he's asked to testify on government ethics is in and of itself a reformation project for him. Here is John Ossoff, senator from Georgia, questioning Michael Mukasey on what he would think would be unethical. Of all the people to ask, honestly, why didn't they ask Rudy Giuliani while they're at it? Here is Michael Mukasey.
Enormously valuable, that was then obliterated because it was said that created the appearance of conflict.
And Judge Mukasey, I'm not in any way questioning or even seeking to interrogate your personal conduct.
Pause it for 1 second. We should say this is because Mukasey is so defensive about his personal conduct that when he got a whiff of what Ossoff was offering, which was a hypothetical, he was like, "Well, you have no idea the damage." Blah, blah, blah. Just to give you a sense of where it is, and Ossoff has to say, "Oh no, I promise you, we're not here to investigate you, despite the fact that you probably deserved it."
Enormously valuable, that was then obliterated because it was said that created the appearance of conflict.
And Judge Mukasey, I'm not in any way questioning or even seeking to interrogate your personal conduct. What I'm asking you is that as a judge, is it fair to say that you most likely would have declined an offer of foreign travel worth hundreds of thousands of dollars because, quite reasonably, you would have had the concern that public disclosure of such travel could have undermined public confidence in the impartiality of your judgment?
Simply because it amounted to, if somebody took me, if I were a district judge and somebody wanted to fly me on his private plane on a vacation with his family and I were friendly with that person, would I have refused and endangered the friendship? I'm not sure that I would have.
Well, I think the American public sees that kind of conduct and quite reasonably asks the question whether it's appropriate.
Okay. Put aside Ossoff's comments there. It's true. But first off, contemplate two things. One, Harlan Crow and Clarence Thomas.
They go back to kindergarten, right?
Were not friends before Clarence Thomas was appointed to the Supreme Court.
25 years, like friend of 25
Let's
years.
just be clear. Let's just be clear. Clarence Thomas was called up in 2011 on these same issues with Harlan Crow. That was 12 years ago. But make no mistake, these were not longtime friends prior to the fact of Clarence Thomas sitting on the court. But here's the other thing. Michael Mukasey's so-called friend who's taking him on an all-expense paid trip on his private jet, he's going to jeopardize this friendship by saying, hey, man, I'm sorry, I'm a judge. And, I can't be seen doing this. I know it's a pain. I mean, this is just bizarre. This is bizarre that this guy is out there trying to defend. Like, I got some news for you, Mukasey, about your friend. If he's not going to be friends with you because he's not in a position to take you an all expense paid trip, maybe there's something ulterior motives he has. I mean, I have been friends with U.S. attorneys. I've been friends with judges, and not district judges. Town judges. And they impose a code of conduct on themselves where their behavior, they are conscious of, I have a position that even if I, engage in certain behaviors or this and that, I've got to be low key about it. Like I have a responsibility to the office. And if a judge has no compunction whatsoever to be flown around the world on a regular basis by a party who has at least sometimes some stuff in front of the court, but at least a sort of like ideological bent about where the court should be, has no compunction. What is the point of judicial ethics? Why do we even talk about it? Why do we talk about judicial temperament? Why? It's all just a fiction. It really is just fascinating for a guy like Mukasey to just admit that publicly. Because this is what we're seeing is, I want to say mask off, but it's not. It's just sort of slowly they're just degenerating on their faces. Because they don't care.
No.
They don't care. They're already in the getaway car. They're just driving away and they're just waving because they know, the drawbridge just got pulled up behind them. I don't know. I'm getting a little carried away on that driveway car metaphor, but I don't know why I see a drawbridge. But that's one of the things. It's like, yeah, so long, nice try. You can't follow us because the drawbridge got pulled up. We'll be talking to Ian Millhiser about this and other things in just a moment. First, a word from our sponsors. One of our sponsors, Henson Shaving. Henson Shaving, a family-owned aerospace parts manufacturer from Canada. I believe it's from Canada. That's made parts for the International Space Station, the Mars rover. Now they are bringing precision engineering to your shaving experience. Look, for a long time, we had a sponsor that had a subscription service and, razors, all well and good. During the, when I grew my beard, I stopped shaving, except for like this one area right here. I wanted a razor that wasn't going to, I didn't need a subscription service. I didn't need any of that. Henson Shaving was the company that we found. And their razors are super cool. They are super well done. I really like this company. They set out to become the business that made the best razor, not necessarily the best razor business. In other words, you buy this razor and then it costs you literally like $3 to $5 a year in blades. It uses the traditional, what do you call those? Like a general, like razor blades that you drop in. This thing is unbelievably manufactured. You just drop the blade in there. This top part comes off. You drop the blade in there. They have these channels. You can see it like this. I don't know. That evacuate your hair and your shaving cream. And the real benefit to their precision, they made space stations, for God's sakes, was that it turns out that the problem with razors is not the sharpness of the blade, but it is the distance of that the blade hangs over. Henson makes metal razors that extend just 0.0013 inches, which is less than the thickness of a human hair. That means that a secure and stable blade with a vibration-free shave, and that's why you get such a close and comfortable shave. Henson Razor works with dual-edged blades. That's what I couldn't access in my brain. Gives you that straight razor shave with the benefits of new school tech. Once you own a Henson Razor, it's only about $3 to $5 per year to replace the blades. I've got this silver one here. They've got other models. They have a black one that is super cool. That is the one I have at home. They are giving my audience a 2-year supply of blades for free. Just go to hensonshaving.com/majority. That's HENSON shaving.com/majority. Add a razor and a 100 pack of blades to your cart. Then enter code majority to get the blades for free. The link is in the description. This is a great Father's Day gift. They haven't mentioned it here. I imagine they'll advertise again before it, and that's not coming up until June. But this is a great Father's Day gift because you give them this, you put the razors in your cart, you get that for free. They're done for at least a couple of years. It really is a great gift. HensonShaving.com/majority. Also, sponsoring the program today, Cedar Seeds. It's back, ladies and gentlemen. Website is back. Site has a new look, some new deals. Enter 420 at checkout. Get 20% off your entire order. We're also now launching our loyalty program. Every $10 you spend earns you a point. Every 10 points you earn can get you 15% off at checkout. Every 25 points you earn can be used to redeem a free packet of Maestro seeds. Welcome back. Happy growing. All units are sold in 6 seeds. Price varies. Credit cards, debit cards, all of it. Promo code is 420. Free shipping. The deal ends May 15th at 11:59 p.m. Check it out, cedarseeds.com. These were actual seeds generated, cannabis seeds that were generated from my failed attempt at growing actual flower and buds.
But
the seeds are great.
We're hoping for a different output, but the seeds are cool.
I know. I can't tell you how excited Matt was. Like his entire like 3 months of pay. Like I was like, I can't believe how big these plants are. So we'll figure out. We'll put out information on how to sex them on the thing. I've sown a bunch of these. I got about 30 of them, and I think I'm like at 26 have sprouted. So, quick break. We'll be right back with Ian Millhiser. We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report. Emma Vigeland off today. Returning to the program, Ian Millhiser, senior correspondent at Vox. Ian, so much I wanted to talk to you about today. We're going to get to the big Chevron case because, frankly, my audience actually I have hammered them so much over the Chevron doctrine over the years that I had people tweeting to me about this case, but everything I know about the Chevron doctrine, I know from interviewing you. So thank you so much for coming on today. And let's just start. There's so many different things. We just got Judge Stevens's papers released, and even the dogs are aware of what the implications are for Scalia. That is your dog actually reading some of Scalia's footnotes. You wrote the book years ago, I guess now, the Injustices, the Supreme Court's history of comforting the comfortable and afflicting the afflicted. This was back in 2015. The court continues, I think, both between Stevens and what we've seen in the past couple of weeks about the corruption, continues to make it clear that there is something really, really broken with this institution.
Yeah. No, I mean, there's been something broken with the institution for a long time. I mean, going back at least as far as the Dred Scott decision. But I think what has changed in the last 10 or 12 years or so is that the court has gone from being a very political institution to being a very partisan institution. You know, we're talking about Justice Stevens. One significance of the fact that Justice Stevens stepped down, Stevens was a Ford appointee. And there were a few interviews where he actually talked about his policy views, and his policy views were pretty doctrinaire Republican policy views. You know, at one point he criticized the minimum wage, but he was considered a liberal justice because he understood that the law is a different concept than what his political party wants. And so up until when Stevens left the court, you still had liberal Republicans. You know, you still had justices whose votes could not be predicted if you knew the political party of the president who appointed them. And now we have a purely partisan court. You know, the Democratic Party knows what it wants from its justices. The Republican Party knows what it wants from its justices. They all vote together in the biggest cases. You know, the only doubt is that when Republican litigants push the fringes of extremism, like we saw in this abortion case, this abortion pills case recently, whether some of the Republican justices will say, well, that's a little too crazy for me. But, you know, we know what a Democratic justice looks like. We know what a Republican justice looks like. And that's a serious problem, because if this is just going to be a partisan institution, then I don't understand why it should wield any power at all. You know, we already have a multi-member body made up of partisan officials who tell us what the law is. It's called Congress.
Right. Why do we need a more everything that every anti-democratic inclination of the Senate is just sort of distilled down. It's like you put that into a pot and you boil it down to its essence. And that's what we have, it seems, at the Supreme Court at this point, except for not even elected at that point.
Right.
All right, let's just briefly talk about this. One thing, I feel like it's just absolutely necessary to note in the Bush v. Gore decision, which is, I think, between that and Iraq, I would not be here. I would be, I would not be sitting here. That decision, at one point, they're talking about, this is just the notes. They're talking about I guess it was black people being disenfranchised. I can't remember exactly what it was. And Scalia writes, I call this the Al Sharpton excuse or something to this effect. It was astonishing to see this guy write in this way. Yeah. Because, I mean, we saw him in the Voting Rights Act case, I guess 12 years later, 13 years later, say that the Voting Rights Act is a giveaway to black people, essentially. Right. But didn't his fellow justices go like, whoa, dude, I mean, can't you keep that under wraps at least? Like, why are you implicating me in how clearly racist you are? Yeah. Or were they just all like, well, yeah, okay.
I mean, I think the dynamics of being on the Supreme Court are difficult because you have to work for with this person for the rest of either your life or the rest of their life. And you need to try to get this person's vote in future cases. So, like, I understand why the justices tend to play nice with each other, even when one of the justices is a terrible racist. But, you know, what we have learned about Justice Scalia throughout the years is that he was a terrible racist, you know. And it's not just that, you know, the specific context that came up in Bush v. Gore is in Justice Ginsburg's dissent. There was a footnote in which she said, I mean, this is a claim that has been borne out by, you know, now that people studied the election, that there were barriers erected in front of Black voters in the Florida election in 2000 that weren't erected in front of other voters. You know, we know that is now true. We know that, like, there were people who were disenfranchised. They had their names removed from the list because they had the same names as convicted felons, and that disproportionately hit Black voters. It disproportionately hit Latino voters. So, like, we know that this happened. Scalia dismissed it. You know, he invoked the name of Al Sharpton. I think it's important to remember this was 23 years ago when Al Sharpton was not, you know, I think, you know, Al Sharpton used to have a show on MSNBC. He's now a major media figure. But at the time, I think his name was widely used by racial conservatives to describe Black activists who were too aggressive. And so that was the insult that Scalia intended. And it's just not a surprise. I mean, when there was the big Voting Rights Act case, Shelby County v. Holder, in front of the Supreme Court in 2015, Scalia called the Voting Rights Act, you know, the seminal law that ended Jim Crow, that made it possible for Black people to have political equality in the United States. He called it a perpetuation of a racial entitlement. So, you know, this guy not that long ago was on the Supreme Court. He died in 2016. And we know, you know, he's a smart guy, but he was also a virulent racist.
What also struck me about that, and then we'll move on to was how much the conservative justices were writing that they were, like, mad at the liberals on the court for calling them out about their involvement in that case. Like, it was a classic, like, people aren't going to feel that the institution is compromised because we messed with something that no one thought we were going to mess with. Because I remember when that case went up there, every legal, like Dershowitz, like, you across the spectrum of legal commentators was like, this is not a case they're going to touch. And everybody was shocked that they touched it, never mind what they ruled. But all the conservative justices wrote that what really undermined legitimacy of the court was the dissenters dissenting and pointing it out.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that, I mean, and this is the same debate that we're having now. You know, if you watch the hearings yesterday about the ethics scandals in the Supreme Court, you know, the Democrats were saying, hey, look, justices shouldn't be taking, you know, hundreds of $1,000s of worth of gifts from billionaires. And the Republicans were saying, how dare you attack Clarence Thomas? That undermines the legitimacy of the Supreme Court. And I guess the question that you have to ask yourself is that, is the court a legitimate institution because it has a mandate from God and we as mere mortals are not allowed to criticize it or, you know, or are not allowed to call into question its legitimacy because this is some divine institution that, you know, is beyond criticism and is beyond losing its legitimacy? Or is legitimacy something that we as citizens of the United States give to our employees on the Supreme Court because they provide us with an important service, because they do their job, you know, in a way that is above board, that respects the political equality of all U.S. citizens, that, you know, does not reveal them to be corrupt. And, you know, therefore, the legitimacy is something that we as citizens give to the court and that we as citizens can take away from the court. Now, we can debate about whether the legitimacy of the court is similar to the divine mandate of kings, but it happens I have a primary source that supports my argument that is not. It's the preamble of the United States Constitution, which begins with the words, "We the people." The United States is a republic. What it means that we are a republic is that the government belongs to us. It is not a divine mandate. It is not handed down from some power up on high. The government is something that we set up to serve our own purposes. And this isn't to say that courts are inherently bad. We set up courts for a very good reason, but they are instrumentalities of the people of the United States. And if they aren't serving the people of the United States, if they are self-dealing, if they are taking these outlandish gifts, if they're handing down decisions that cannot be comported with the law, if they're in hoc to a political movement and not trying to obey the law as it is written, yes, that diminishes their legitimacy, because again, we are a republic, not a monarchy. And that means that we own our government.
The interesting thing to me about it is, I mean, you've obviously, you wrote this book in 2015. I mean, criticizing the Supreme Court, not for for its the corruption of the institution in the way that it functioned within our society, not so much for this sort of almost like petty corruption.
Right.
And this is sort of just like a icing on the cake. I don't think that Clarence Thomas or any of these people fundamentally have altered their worldview because of this corruption. But I think they get a pipeline. There's a pipeline of just being fed stuff as if they're locked in a room with Mark Levin on the radio, and that's the only thing that they're exposed to. It seems like a part of a whole rather than a subset, or I should say a distinct aspect of the corruption of the institution.
Yeah, no, I mean, the way that the court has historically operated is very much in dialogue with the legal profession. And that's, that's not the ideal circumstance in a democracy where the only way you can have a real influence on the court is through lawyers. But it is at least a check. Historically, if there was an article that appeared in the Harvard Law Review that criticized the journal, that criticized a court decision, the justices would at least be aware of it, and they would probably read it and take the criticism seriously. What has happened now is you essentially have two different legal professions. So you have the Federalist Society, which has developed its own rules and its own norms and its own professional and social community, so that the way that you become a justice, Brett Kavanaugh's a smart guy. He is not the smartest lawyer. He's not among the 100 or 200 or probably 1,000 smartest lawyers in the country. He is smart enough to get on the Supreme Court. But the reason why he got there is because he has all these professional connections within the Federalist Society. You can say the same thing about Neil Gorsuch. You can say the same thing about Amy Coney Barrett. And the Federalist Society has developed its own alternative set of legal doctrines. Its own alternative set of what the Constitution means. It is obsessed with these concepts, things like the unitary executive that, don't really matter that much to normal lawyers. And because they've created their own professional community, that means two things. One is it means that these justices can appear internally consistent while they're still doing very partisan work, because what they're doing is consistent with this alternative legal framework that conservatives have come up with. But it also helps keep them in line, because, the one thing that matters a whole lot more than whether you're being bribed by Harlan Crow or whether you're getting some sort of financial validation because you're doing something terrible, is whether your friends are going to be happy with you. People care a lot about what people in their social and professional communities think about them. And if your social and professional communities is all of the lawyers in the United States, you're going to reach more sensible decisions than if your social and professional community is the Federalist Society.
That's fascinating. I mean, it really is in many ways analogous to what has happened in terms of like the media, where there is a right-wing media sphere where you don't have to exit it. It's now completely self-supporting. And the Federalist Society has created that same sort of like, having been raised by lawyers in my life, there was like, they thought they were in a priesthood. And it's just that these right-wing lawyers, it would appear like they are excommunicated from that priesthood, but it's just the fact is they just started a different religion. And it is a religion within, it's a separate sort of like just section. They have sectioned it off so that they can get the exact same type of reinforcement and have the same sort of dynamic, but completely different sets of values that are far less contingent on those like classic sort of legal values and more on winning, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, I think like the priesthood analogy is a good one because like essentially what you have going on in the legal profession right now and in the courts is you have a schism. I mean, I don't know if this makes Leonard Leo, the chair of the Federalist Society, like the anti-pope.
Right.
But it's the same sort of concept where like you have these people who are all very well educated, by definition, they all have law degrees. They are inculcated into a set of rules and norms in much the same way that a literal priesthood is. We have our own rituals in the legal profession. What do you think the black robes are all about? And what has happened is that, you essentially have a schism within this legal priesthood where you have a very well organized group of dissidents who think that the doctrine that has been taught by the court for many, many decades and the doctrine that has been held as sacred by the legal priesthood for many, many decades is in fact wrong. And, we should read the Bible a different way. We should read the Constitution a different way. And I mean, schisms are fine. Like it's fine that we argue. It's fine that we argue about religion. The problem is that when the anti-pope, when the schisming priests have the power to tell you what the law is and to veto or rewrite any law, then it's no longer an academic debate. Then it starts to impact everyone in the country.
Right. And we should make it clear that this schism is not based upon sort of like different perspectives on how to approach the law as much as a fundamental, it seems to me, reorienting of the legal methodology almost. The approach to what the point of it all is on some level.
I mean, I think to a certain extent, I mean, I don't want to go so far as say all law is fake, but like the Constitution is a very vague document. It says that the police shall not engage in unreasonable searches and seizures. What does unreasonable mean? It says that punishments shall not be cruel and unusual. Like, how cruel is too cruel? There's literally a provision in the 14th Amendment that says that no one shall be denied the privileges or immunities of citizenship. Do you know what the privileges or immunities of citizenship are? Because I don't. It doesn't say anywhere in the Constitution what the privileges or immunities of citizenship are. I can tell you what the Supreme Court has said they are, but what the Supreme Court has said is that they basically don't exist. So, like, you have this extremely vague document, vaguer than the Bible. And you then give these 9 individuals the power to issue binding pronouncements about what this document means. And, first of all, it's not surprising that both political parties want to capture this institution because that's just a tremendous amount of power. But more importantly, it means that they aren't really constrained. I mean, they're constrained by themselves. If they choose to follow precedent, they can. If they choose, after, in the New Deal era, the Supreme Court handed down a lot of very poorly reasoned decisions striking down New Deal policies. There was a major backlash to that. And the settlement that emerged from the New Deal is the Supreme Court said, we're just going to stay out of economic policy altogether. We are going to show judicial restraint. But The fact that the justices voluntarily choose to restrain themselves doesn't mean that there's any external force constraining them. And what we're seeing right now is what happens when the Supreme Court is controlled by people who don't constrain themselves and who don't have any external force that can constrain them either.
And I should just say lastly, like, I mean, you know, for the past, up until a couple of years ago, really, the thing that you would hear constantly from the conservative judicial minds was the idea of judicial activism. It is fascinating to me how those words have been basically put into like a space capsule and jettisoned. I've not heard the words judicial activism in years. And it was literally the only thing you would hear. I mean, this is what I'm talking about in terms of like what is turned. Like there was always, I mean, that was, from Brandeis brief time.
Yeah.
Like for a long time, there was this sort of like balance. I'd never bought it, but at least like that was, and then on a dime, it's gone as soon as they get the keys to the car.
So this is something I write about in my book, Injustices, is that I think that confident political movements tend to speak in the language of judicial restraint. Like if you go back to Franklin Roosevelt, Roosevelt had this court that was going after his policies, striking down New Deal policies left and right. They had all of these doctrines like, the Lochner decision, which made it very difficult to have any kind of progressive labor laws. And Roosevelt did not say, what I'm going to do is I'm going to appoint a bunch of justices who agree with me, and they're going to implement my policies from the bench. He didn't say that. He said, I want the court to just stay out of policymaking, let me govern. And the reason why he said that is because he was very popular. He won landslide election after landslide election. For much of his presidency, he had enormous loyal majorities in the Congress. And so he was the head of a politically confident movement. If you look at Ronald Reagan's rhetoric about the judiciary, it's almost exactly the same as Roosevelt. I mean, Reagan also spoke a lot about judicial restraint. And again, I'm not a huge fan of Ronald Reagan, but you cannot argue that he wasn't politically ascendant. He also won 2 landslide elections. Republicans had every reason to be confident in democracy in the 1980s, because democracy, the democratic process was working for them. It was electing Republicans by overwhelming margins. And what has happened now, I mean, in 7 of the last 8 presidential elections, the Democratic candidate has won the popular vote. If it wasn't for Senate malapportionment, Republicans wouldn't have controlled the United States Senate since the late 1990s. So the Republican Party right now knows it can't win through the democratic process. It has no reason to be confident in its own ability to pull together a political majority. And when you have a political movement that knows that it cannot win through the democratic process, that party basically has 2 choices. Either it can change its views and try to, say something popular and win that way, or it can say, we're going to look for ways to bypass the democratic system. The easiest way to bypass the democratic system in the United States is the Supreme Court.
Well, that's a perfect entree into Loper Bright Enterprises v. Raimondo. Again, I think I'm proud that this audience is so sensitive to this issue. It is because of conversations that you and I have had really over the past 10 years, it feels like. And it sort of feels like the moment of reckoning. I guess we're at the beginning of the moment of reckoning, it really feels like. Just tell us about the case. The details of the case are really secondary as to what it clearly is set up to tee up for the justices.
Yeah. So the background to understand this case is that Congress generally doesn't micromanage every aspect of federal policy. They will announce, broad policy goals and frequently delegate to federal agencies the task of dealing with what the details of those policies could be. And, sometimes the delegation is pretty substantial. The Clean Air Act, for example, says that certain power plants have to use the best available technology to reduce certain emissions. And so it is up to the EPA to determine, well, we're going to study what the technology looks like right now. We're going to study, what the plants can actually afford to do. And then we're going to say, this is the best available technology right now. And we're going to issue what's called a regulation requiring power plants to use that technology. And then when the technology improves, they can issue a new regulation that imposes greater obligations on power plants. So sometimes these are things that really matter. I mean, this was what a big recent fight in the Supreme Court that the Supreme Court got wrong about climate change was about. Sometimes these are very minor details, like, a question of and I'm just going to describe the facts of actual cases. What are the rules for hearings for coal mine workers who want black lung benefits like that? Not all those details are set by a statute. There's a federal agency that determines some of those details. What should the nitrogen emissions be from wastewater treatment plants? That's up to the EPA. So there's just a whole lot of this delegation going on. And what the Supreme Court said in Chevron is they said that generally speaking, we want courts to defer to an agency's determination about what these regulations should be. And the reason why is twofold. One is democracy. One is that while the heads of federal agencies are not elected, they serve at the pleasure of a president who is elected. And so if you don't like what the EPA is doing, if you don't like what the Department of Labor is doing, if you don't like what any federal agency is doing, you take it out on the president in the next election. And, the justices just aren't accountable in that way. The other reason is that these federal agencies actually know what the hell they're talking about. Think about the case I was describing. Do you know how much nitrogen should be emitted by a wastewater treatment plant? Because I sure don't. I mean,
I have some ideas. No, of course not. But yes, no, of course not. And I wouldn't even begin. I mean, you get the edict of, Clean Water Act. I wouldn't even know what constitutes what drugs, what chemicals do I not want in the water that constitute something to be unhealthy? I have no idea. And in fact, even the EPA has to figure out what chemicals are in there because they don't necessarily always know. That was a big part of the whole fracking issue is that they were using, we didn't even know what they were poisoning the water with. And you can't just dip a test tube into the water and all of a sudden all the chemicals show up. This is something that evolves, from moment to moment even.
Or take a case. Here's a case that's in front of the Supreme Court right now. It's called the Sackett case. The issue in this case is it deals with wetlands. So the problem is there's not a clear border. If you have a river, and this might be a river that supplies an entire, thousands of people with drinking water. It's not like there's a clear boundary where the river ends and the land begins. And it's okay if I dump a bunch of toxic chemicals, or if I do something that could pollute this river, a mile away from the river, because it's not going to get into the water supply. What you have is that the river transitions to a beach, which transitions into wetlands, and you have all these streams and tributaries coming into it. And I could potentially dump a toxic chemical 100 miles away, and it winds up in the drinking supply. And I don't know where to draw the line and say that look, you can't do any dumping here because it can get into the water supply. Who does know how to do that? The Environmental Protection Agency knows how to make that determination because they are experts in it. And so what this Sackett case is about, what this Loper case that we were talking about earlier is about, is whether when you have these really difficult technical decisions, should they be made by experts? Should they be made by the EPA, the Department of Labor, the Department of Health and Human Services, whoever the government officials are who actually know what they're talking about? Or should the final word rest with a bunch of lawyers in black robes?
But isn't the question of the Chevron doctrine, because there's been a fairly recent development of this major questions doctrine, and that feels the major questions doctrine has been, as far as I can tell, made up of whole cloth over the past 15, 20 years. And it basically says, if we as the court determine that this issue reaches a threshold, we have no definition of that threshold. Yes. We know it when we see it. Reaches a threshold of being a major question. That could be a monetary question. It could be a social import question. It could be anything, really, that they determine in that moment then we get to decide what the answer is. Their attack on the Chevron is sort of like doctrine seems to me to be dressed up a little bit more where it's like, we can't decide, but Congress has to be very specific about this, which is in practical purposes impossible. Even if you had 435 members of one party, it still seems it would be impossible for Congress to be able to make a determination and to write legislation that says the definition of clean water is the absence of, and then list every potential chemical that exists in the world now or in the near future or in the far future that could otherwise make drinking water unhealthy. This is just a, extreme example. That's impossible to do. And so in attacking the Chevron doctrine, it seems to me the court is hiding behind something they know is impossible, but they're not saying we're going to decide. We're just saying that like Congress has to be more explicit when they know that's not physically possible.
Yeah, I mean, the court, so the major questions doctrine is is a huge exception to Chevron. Again, the general rule in Chevron is that we want expert agencies making these regulatory decisions and not judges who don't know what the hell they're talking about. The major questions doctrine doesn't come from anywhere. Like, it's not in the Constitution, it's not in any statute, it's something that the justices just made up. But what it says is essentially when they deem a particular policy question to be major, whatever that means. I mean, they said that it means a matter of vast economic or political importance. Again, whatever that means. Then the court will essentially veto the regulation. And like, they've come up with this rationale to make it sound like it's not a veto, like, oh, we expect Congress to speak very clearly and they just didn't speak clearly enough here. And no, it's just a veto. That's all it is. It's just 5 justices on the Supreme Court think this regulation goes too far, so they veto it. That's all it is. So they've already said that they will veto important regulations if they don't like them. What this new case, the Loper case, is about is essentially whether they will also veto unimportant or relatively minor regulations. I shouldn't say unimportant, but like the specific issue in the Loper case is fishing vessels are required to allow federal monitors on board who will like make sure that there isn't overfishing going on, that, they'll do a bunch of monitoring in order to make sure that the fishery is sustainable. And the question is whether or not the federal government has to pay in full for this monitor, or whether the fishing company that owns the vessel can be required to pay for some of the cost of this monitor. Now, that's not the most important question in the world. Like, the world is not going to rise and fall depending on whether or not this monitor is paid by the fishing company. But the Code of Federal Regulations is 200 volumes long. It concerns all kinds of things. What kind of safety goggles do certain workers have to wear on the job? What kind of what are the emission standards for wastewater plants? What are the rules for one kind of hearing or another? Who's entitled to a certain kind of benefits? And when you take all of that in aggregate, it matters to hundreds of millions of people's lives. And again, the question in this case is whether these very important decisions, which, it doesn't matter to many people who pays for the fishing monitor, but it matters a lot to the people in the fishing industry. It doesn't matter to many people, maybe, how much nitrogen can be emitted by a wastewater plant, but it's probably going to matter to you if you live by that wastewater plant. So these are decisions that in the aggregate matter to everyone in the country. And the question is, are they going to be made by experts who are politically accountable, or are they going to be made by unelected judges who don't know what they're talking about and who can't be removed from office?
And we should say that in practice, the major questions doctrine seems to be really almost, to the extent that we can tell what it is, can only really be deployed by the Supreme Court, it feels like, because if it's that major of a question that a court could make the decision, you need to go to the highest court. But if the court strikes down the Chevron doctrine, or essentially rips it apart and says we're no longer bound by this, then you have federal courts all across the country who can deal. The company says, we want to dump this stuff in the waterway. Right. And Congress didn't say we couldn't dump this stuff. They didn't even know it existed. We just invented it. It's a byproduct. We're dumping it in the waterway. And that federal court for that region essentially can say, there is no Chevron doctrine. You're right. The Congress didn't say you can't dump this in there. And then this can happen sort of like under the radar of the national media, the consciousness of like everybody. And we will just see this incredible degradation of the administrative state's protection of consumers, of citizens, of, the environment, of all of it will just be degraded in a way that we can't really even be aware of in the aggregate.
Yeah. And the problem's worse than you describe, actually, because we also have seen this rise of judges who are basically just rubber stamps for whatever conservative litigant comes before them. You probably remember there was this big fight about mifepristone, the abortion drug. It's a drug that's used in more than half of all abortions in the United States. They got this Christian right organization called the Alliance Defending Freedom went to Amarillo, Texas to file this lawsuit. Well, why did they go to Amarillo, Texas to file this lawsuit? Well, there's only one federal judge in Amarillo, Texas. His name is Matthew Kaczmarek, and Matthew Kaczmarek hears every single lawsuit that is filed in a federal court in Amarillo, Texas. And he has proven to be, he's spent his career as a Christian right activist. He is who he is, but he has spent his time on the bench as just a rubber stamp for anything that any Republican litigant asks him to do. He went after birth control. He went after, he forced Biden to reinstate a Trump-era border policy. He went after mifepristone. He tried to strike down the ban on LGBT discrimination by health providers. This guy's really bad. His decisions have no grounding in the law. And when he issues his decisions, he frequently issues a nationwide injunction, which means that everywhere in the country, whatever King Matt decides the rule is supposed to be, we all, we all have to obey King Matt. Now, King Matt's decisions appeal to the Fifth Circuit. The problem is the Fifth Circuit is dominated by judges who think the same way that King Matt does. And so they won't reverse him. Then it goes up to the Supreme Court. And in the Supreme Court, it's kind of a crapshoot. In the mifepristone case, they did the right thing because I think the Justice Department convinced them that if that decision stood, it would just create far too much chaos. It would blow up the entire drug approval process in this country. But often they just let King Matt's decision stay in place. They let King Matt decide what our border policy was going to be for 11 months. They forced, King Matt forced the Biden administration to implement Trump's border policy before finally the Supreme Court stepped in and said, yeah, after 11 months of this, you're right, King Matt's decision was wrong. And so what we're going to have if Chevron is overruled is litigants will find, there's 600 or 700 federal district judges in this country. They will find the one judge in the country who will give them what they want. They'll get a nationwide order. And then maybe you get it overturned on appeal, but that can take months.
And it seems to me there's a lot less sort of like opportunity for appeal. And also you're talking about some of the most powerful interests in the country, corporate interests. So you mentioned the mifepristone ruling. What is the status of that? Is that completely resolved? And also, let me just say, I prefer cleric because I really do think that with a guy like that, what we're talking about is a Christian nationalist, and it is King almost sounds too secular to me. But be that as it may, where are we on the mifepristone case?
Yeah. So the mifepristone case, there's still probably two more rounds of litigation that have to happen. But I am optimistic, given what the Supreme Court did, that at least this problem is going to go away. So what happened here is that, again, Christian right organization went to Matthew Kaczmarek's courtroom. And there are all kinds of problems with this lawsuit. I mean, first of all, you have to show that you've been injured in some way by whatever federal policy you're challenging. That's called standing in order to bring a federal lawsuit. And none of these plaintiffs were injured by, the fact that this drug exists. These weren't people who took the drug. These weren't people who prescribed the drug. So they shouldn't have been in court in the first place. Second of all, essentially what Kaczmarek's decision said was that, I looked at the research, all the scientific research that the FDA looked at to determine that this drug is safe. But this website called Abortion Changes You did a study, and it found that something like 70 or 80% of the women who wrote blog posts on our website about abortion said that they had an abortion and it changed them in a negative way. And I think that study is more reliable than all the scientific evidence that the FDA relied on.
We should just say, you're not joking.
Yeah.
I just want to make that clear to people. You're not joking. That is literally what was the basis of this case.
Yeah, I mean, he came up with some other, there were some other garbage studies that he looked at as well. But what he said is essentially, Matty Kaczmarek, a dude with a law degree and no scientific training whatsoever, no more than the Food and Drug Administration and all of the doctors and scientists who have conducted hundreds of studies on mifepristone, and therefore I am going to determine that mifepristone is not safe. Now, eventually that went up to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court blocked his ruling. I am optimistic that the Supreme Court has said that they would block it and they're going to hold to that position. What is the process that's going to happen now is this is on appeal to the Fifth Circuit. It's possible the Fifth Circuit will kick out the case, although the Fifth Circuit's very right wing, so it depends on. The Fifth Circuit hears cases in randomly selected three judge panels. So in the Fifth Circuit, everything depends on who is selected to sit on that 3-judge panel. And if the Fifth Circuit reverses Kaczmarek, if they throw his decision out, I think that's probably the end of the case. If the Fifth Circuit does not, it'll go up to the Supreme Court. And given that the Supreme Court has already voted on this once, I am optimistic that the Supreme Court is going to leave mifepristone on the market.
Okay. And we should say, I just want to go back, the Loper Bright Enterprises versus Raimondo case, the one that we're talking about in terms of the Chevron doctrine, that has actually been accepted for next term. So that's going to be probably argued in the fall. There may be oral arguments in the fall of 2023, and it'll be decided in 2024. What is going to be decided in June or July, more likely June of this year, is Glacier Northwest versus Teamsters.
Yep.
Tell us about this case, and then maybe we'll just mention one or two others that you think are really important for us to keep an eye on. But this case seems to me to be, over the past couple of years, we have seen a series of cases that were only interrupted by Scalia dying, and then of attacks on unions' ability to exist, to strike, to get agency fees. This one is really strikes at the heart of the ability of a labor action.
Yeah, that's right. So basically, I'm in a union. Basically, where any union's power comes from is the ability of all of the workers to collectively walk away from the job. That's the implicit threat that rests over any union contract negotiation, is that if you mistreat us, if we don't like the pay that the page give us, whatever, all of us collectively will walk away, and then you won't get anything done because you won't have any workers. This case deals with, now there are rules governing when you can and cannot strike. As a general rule, a strike is allowed when the workers call for a strike. It is allowed if they call it at a time that'll cost the company money, because again, the whole point of a strike is that, you're going to cost the company money through the absence of your labor.
Right. I mean, if you're striking against Starbucks, the idea that you would strike from the, 9 o'clock at night when the store closes until 6 a.m. when it opens is absurd. That's not a strike.
Exactly. You strike at the time when it's going to cost the company money. Now, there are rules, like a union is not allowed to, if it's a Starbucks union, they're not allowed to smash the espresso machine on their way out the door. Like, they have to respect the employer's property in that regard. And there are some decisions dealing with very marginal, like I think there was a case at like a lead smelting firm or a lead smelting company where the strike began like as the molten lead was like in the pot being hot and very, very dangerous. And in that case, I think the National Labor Relations Board said, like, you can't pick that specific moment to strike. Like, you have to make sure that like there's a minimum amount of safety before you walk away from the job. This case doesn't involve anything like molten lead. This case involves cement truck drivers. And the facts of the case were when it came time to strike, they took their trucks, they drove them back to the lot, so they didn't abscond with the employer's property. They left the drums turning, which is important because if the drum's not turning, then the cement can harden and, then you could destroy the truck. So they didn't do anything to destroy any of the important equipment. The company complains that because the workers weren't there after the cement was mixed, that essentially they lost the value of the wet cement. And that means that the strike was illegal. Now, essentially what they're saying is like, you timed your strike at a time that would cost us money, therefore your strike is illegal. And again, all strikes are timed to cost the company money, for the same reason that you don't strike when the store is closed and then end the strike when the store is open. If the rule is you can't strike at a time that's going to cost the company money, then you can't have strikes. And if you can't have strikes, then unions are useless. Because again, like, the power that a union has is the power for every worker in the company to say at the exact same moment, we're going to stop working now.
I mean, it is so obvious. Like, there is no such thing as a strike that doesn't cost money for the employer, because that's why they have labor, to make money. And if there's no labor, they can't make the money. That just, it just seems completely obvious. So what is the justification for this case to move forward to the point where the Supreme Court is looking at it? Because it really is effectively saying there is no power to strike, period, against a profit-making company.
Yeah, I mean, again, like, there are a few cases dealing with very marginal circumstances, like the lead smelting firm, where like it is established that if a union times a strike in a way that could like endanger human lives, or or that could lead to like who knows what happens if you just leave a bunch of molten lead lying around, like. There are extreme cases where the union has an obligation to like do something with the molten lead before they go on strike. But this is not this case. This isn't about molten lead. This is about cement.
Right. Well, the point is, it's not about health and safety. It's strictly about the profits of the company.
Exactly.
And so what is the justification of it getting this far? Because by definition, a strike is to deny capital profits, in the same way that the strike also denies workers compensation for working.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I wish that I had like a lawyerly answer to that question. But like, the reason this case has gotten this far is because the Supreme Court hates the hell out of unions. And like, this is another vehicle that gives them an opportunity to, in a very technocratic way that a lot of people aren't going to understand, diminish the power of unions. Now, I want to see what the opinion says before I comment on how bad it is. But like, again, if like unions have to start timing their strikes to make sure it's not done. I mean, I'm thinking about, during my last contract negotiation, like it happened to be the case that our contract expired in June. And that mattered a lot to me because I'm a Supreme Court reporter and all of the biggest decisions come down in June. So does that mean that I am not allowed to strike in June because I am especially valuable to my company in the month of June, since that's when the most important news happens on my beat? You know, they're like, there has to be some kind of line that is clear where the union knows when it's allowed to strike. And I think the thing that I'm most afraid of that we might get from the Supreme Court is a very vague decision where unions don't know when they're allowed to strike and when they aren't allowed to strike. And every time a union calls a strike, it winds up becoming a federal case.
But if they decide, even in vague terms, that, like, vaguely speaking, the union cannot cause a company to lose money, then I can tell you, like, you know, people can hire me as a strike buster because here's my advice. Wait till it costs you $1 and then the strike is illegal and then they come back to work. I mean, it's game over, it seems, to any type of work actions in that respect. I guess it's just like fines being levied on the union, but it really is, it's extraordinary. When will this come out? Will we get the decision? Probably in the next month and a half or so, right?
Yeah, I mean, the Supreme Court, apparently May 11th, they've been very, very slow this term in handing down decisions. But apparently May 11th, they're going to start handing down at least some decisions every week. I mean, this is a big case. It's a case that's likely to produce, you know, a partisan divide, a 6-3 divide in the Supreme Court. And so I think that this one's probably going to come down closer to the end of June when, you know, the big decisions come down.
What other big decisions should we be looking out for? Because we've gone a little bit long here. I really appreciate you hanging with me. Obviously, I told you, I warned you right up front that I had a lot of things I wanted to talk to you about. But what other cases should we keep an eye on, and maybe we'll catch up with you again over the next month and a half?
I mean, the truth is they've taken so many big political cases this term, it's hard for me to remember them all on the spur of the moment. They're probably going to end affirmative action in university admissions. There is a big case involving President Biden's loan cancellation program. Right. And I'll just say to anyone who has student loans, if you're planning on that student loan cancellation when you're doing your own finances, don't, because the Republicans on the Supreme Court were pretty clear that I think it's very unlikely that the loan cancellation program is going to survive.
Let me just ask you one question on that. That was not, is their decision, there was some controversy as to what authority Biden used on the college loan thing. They used COVID as opposed to some inherent power that the Secretary of Education had. But it sounded like in the oral arguments that question didn't even arise in the minds of the conservative justices. They were just like, can't do it regardless.
Yeah. I mean, I can only guess what they're going to say in their opinion. I think that the justices are going to have to be very creative to come up with a way to strike down the student loan plan. And then the reason why is because there's a federal law called the HEROES Act. This was enacted in the wake of 9/11. The concern was that there were people who were victims of the terrorist attack, and there were also service members who, like, may have had a high-paying job and were in the reserves. They were called to service, and so they had to go be deployed where they would be paid less money by the military. And this could impact their ability to pay back their student loans. And so Congress passed this law called the HEROES Act that says, if you are impacted by some sort of major disaster or national emergency, you shouldn't be made worse off because you aren't able to pay your student loans. And so the Secretary of Education has the power to cancel loans in connection with this kind of a national emergency declared by the President of the United States. The statute is very broad. It says, basically, so long as there's a national emergency declared by the President of the United States and the Secretary of Education determines that this loan cancellation is connected to the emergency, that's it. That's all you need. It has all sorts of provisions saying that the secretary doesn't have to jump through the normal procedures. They don't that they like. It is very, very clear that the secretary has the power to do this. And so in 2020, we had a national emergency. It was the COVID-19 pandemic. Donald Trump was the president of the United States, and he declared a national emergency. And the Trump administration used the HEROES Act over and over and over again to pause student loan payments. No one questioned when a Republican president was doing it that the HEROES Act means what it says, and in connection with the national emergency, the secretary has the power to cancel or modify student loan obligations. The only difference in this case is that it's now a Democratic administration doing it. And so I think the Supreme Court is really going to have to be clever to write an opinion here.
And we should add, too, that in the American Rescue Plan passed in February or March of 2021, Congress anticipated the cancellation of loans, specifically saying that in the event that there are student loans that are canceled up until 2025, they cannot be counted as income relative to the as far as the IRS is concerned. Because often when you get a loan forgiveness, that can be considered like a gift in kind, or an expense in kind, and that constitutes some type of income. So they contemplated, they reiterated essentially the power that the labor secretary had to do this by anticipating it being done and saying, if it is done, it does not count as income for federal taxes.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, this was the 2021 recovery bill, the one that was passed at the beginning of the Biden administration. It essentially said, I think it's up to $50,000 worth of loan cancellation. If you receive up to $50,000 worth of loan cancellation, you don't have to pay taxes on it. And that provision only makes sense if the secretary has the power to cancel loans. I mean, Congress doesn't pass laws saying like you don't have to pay taxes on your unicorn, because unicorns don't exist.
Right.
The whole premise of Congress saying you don't have to pay taxes on loans that are canceled by the Secretary of Education is that the Secretary of Education has the power to cancel loans.
So the college loans case, the affirmative action case, any others that right off the top of your head? I won't hold you to a complete exhaustive list.
I mean, well, the other massive case that was scaring a lot of people at the beginning of the term is Moore v. Harper. And this is a case that, in the worst case scenario, like the theory behind this case is that policies governing federal elections may only be set by the legislative branch in each state, cannot be vetoed by the governor, cannot be overridden by the state constitution or the state courts. And, if this extreme version of the theory were to take effect, it would mean that in a state like Wisconsin, where you have a very gerrymandered state legislature that's controlled by Republicans, but you have a Democratic governor and you have a Supreme Court that's a state Supreme Court that's about to be controlled by Democrats, the state legislature could essentially pass a law saying Wisconsin's electoral votes shall go to Donald Trump, and there'd be nothing anyone could do about it. Now, at the oral arguments, the Supreme Court seemed worried about going that far. I think that we were more likely to get a decision that essentially just, instead of putting state legislatures in charge of every election, puts the Supreme Court in charge of every election. It goes back to what we were saying before with Chevron, where they want to be in charge of everything. I don't even know if we're going to get that anymore, though. And the reason why is that the actual decision on appeal in the Moore v. Harper case was a decision of the North Carolina Supreme Court striking down that state's gerrymandered congressional maps. And the North Carolina Supreme Court, when they struck down the maps, was controlled by Democrats. Now it's controlled by Republicans. Republicans have overturned the previous decision striking down those maps. And so now there isn't even a decision on appeal.
Right. They could walk away from this. What's interesting, though, in Stevens's papers, it appears that Rehnquist was pushing that independent legislature doctrine in Bush v. Gore as a way of disempowering the Florida State Supreme Court from interfering in Florida's election. He was sort of head off at the pass by Sandra Day O'Connor, who sort of got out of the gate quicker with her sort of decision. But I haven't read into that stuff enough to really get a sense of it. But that idea has been floating around to disempower state courts and have like a legislature. I maybe at another time we can talk about whether that presages the idea that a legislature can't even delegate authority to independent redistricting commissions or something to that effect. Like all the power vests in, when we say, like legislature, like specifically the lawmakers as opposed to the government of the state.
Right. Yeah. And if I could just talk briefly to what happened in Bush v. Gore. I mean, what happened there was that the Florida Supreme Court at the time, back in 2000, was dominated by Democratic appointees. And there was a perception amongst Republicans that the Florida Supreme Court was kind of playing fast and loose with Florida election law in order to help out Al Gore. And in some cases, I think Republicans had a point. But the Supreme Court solution, the U.S. Supreme Court solution to that problem was to say, well, the Florida Supreme Court won't make the final word. The Democrats on the Florida Supreme Court won't have the final word. Instead, the Republicans on the U.S. Supreme Court will have the final word. And like, someone has to decide how our elections result. And I don't think it's great that political parties frequently capture state Supreme Courts and use that power to skew their election law one way or the other. On the other hand, there are 50 different states. And like, we don't know before an election which states are going to matter and which states don't. I am much more comfortable in a world where in this election, maybe Florida is the pivotal state, and maybe Florida has a Democratic Supreme Court, so Democrats get a little bit of an advantage that way. And the next election, maybe, who knows, Georgia might be the key state, and Georgia has a Republican Supreme Court. I'm much more comfortable with that world than I am with the world that the Supreme Court seemed to be contemplating in the Moore v. Harper argument, which is that whenever there's a contested election, it comes down to the U.S. Supreme Court, which is controlled by partisan Republicans. I'd much rather have a little bit of randomness in our elections than have absolute certainty that the Republicans have the final word.
Ian Millhiser, thank you so much. I really appreciate you going along with me over this stuff. I find it fascinating. I hope people understand the importance of all this. If for far too long, I feel like people have not understood the implications of who gets to appoint those federal judges to the bench for a lifetime. And I'm afraid that we're going to figure out a little too late on the importance of that, at least for a generation or two. But hopefully we can reconnect as these cases come out. Ian Millhiser, thanks so much again.
All right. Thank you, Sam.
All right, folks. There it is. I don't know if people remember back. What was the case that was that it was not the Janus case, was the case that was taken back up by the Supreme Court to disempower unions. But prior to the Janus case, there was another case before Scalia died that was going to be really important. And I think you remember like that at that time, I was determined. I think we probably did like 8 episodes on that case because all I wanted was, I had basically said this is going to be an exclusively a podcast that with one agenda, and that was the agenda to make people understand the implications of the case that ultimately became the Janus case. Somebody will remind me on the IMs, and I'll mention it in the fun half. I can't remember. But it was one of the reasons why I was so celebratory about Scalia's death. One of them. Sure, like I say, he was a nice guy. Maybe a nice dad. Maybe nice. I mean, I'm not sure. Yeah. Can't possibly be sure.
I'm open to the idea.
I'm open to the idea. I'm open to the idea. I'm not making any assertions about that. Let's put it that way. Folks, it is your support that makes this show possible. Only members would support a show that would spend this much time on Supreme Court cases that is not like a Supreme Court case podcast. And you can help the show survive and thrive by becoming a member at jointhemajorityreport.com. When you do, you not only get the fun half, the free half free of commercials, you also get the fun half. And you get the ability to IM the show through the app, and working on other benefits, always trying to come up with them. But jointhemajorityreport.com. Also, don't forget justcoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. Use the coupon code majority, you get 10% off. If you're a member, always remember we will put the coupon codes and deals that you're getting in the podcast and YouTube descriptions. Check those out. Maybe every now and then we'll put an ad in so you get an idea of what deals are there for you. Today's sponsors, Henson Shaving and Cedar Seeds. Cedar's Seeds. Both of those work. Ryan and Callie says, I very much doubt Scalia is a nice guy. I mean, look, one could never know. It's all speculation.
It's rhetoric.
You know. If you like a big old racist guy, you know. I'm sure Tucker Carlson would have enjoyed him. Also, don't forget ESVN. What happened this week, Bradley?
Oh, we just
Amazon taking a personal day because of the Rangers.
Yeah, we this was our Monday show. We had a bit of better vibes because it was before the Rangers Devils Game 7 that really cast a pallor over the studio yesterday. But we just broke down a lot of the NBA and NHL playoff action from last week and touched upon, and also did a little bit of an NFL draft recap. Who were the winners and losers of the draft after it concluded on Saturday. YouTube.com/ESPN show for more. Matt, what's happening on Left Reckoning?
Yeah, last night, Left Reckoning, we had Chris James of Not Even a Show on to talk about pranking, for instance, the people who vote against school lunch debt, and also using AI voice generation of Sebastian Gorka or Ben Shapiro to call into right-wing programs. And pretty funny talk we had last night. Patreon.com/Left Reckoning to get the postgame.
All right. Quick break, 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
You are in for it.
All right, folks, 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
Oh, no. Oh, no.
Are you ready?
Who sent us this?
Anarchy. Alpha males are back. Boy is back, and the alpha males are back.
Just as delicious as you could imagine.
The alpha males are back. Boy is back, and the alpha males are back.
Just wanna degrade the white man.
Alpha males are back.
I take all of it in my throat.
Alpha males are back.
Snowflake says what?
The alpha males are back.
You are a madman.
And the alpha males are back.
Oh no, Sam Seder! What a fucking nightmare!
Bring back DJ.
Yeah, or a couple of them. Just put them in rotation.
DJ Denner.
Well, the problem with those is they're like 45 seconds long, so I don't know if they're enough of a break.
That's fucking nonsense. You see white people doing drugs, they look worse than normal white people, and all white people look disgusting.
And the alpha males,
psych, fuck them.
Snowflake says what? Snowflake says what?
A hell of a lot of bank. Okay, I'm making stupid money. Hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. All lives matter.
Have you tried doing an impression on a college campus?
I think that there's no reason why reasonable people across the divide can't all agree with this. Psych.
And the alpha males are back. And the Africans are black African. And the alpha males are black
Trump out there, doesn't a little part of you think that America deserves to be taken over by jihadists? Keeping it 100. Can't knock the hustle. Come on, fuck 'em, fuck 'em. Things I do for the bigger game plan. By the way, it's my birthday. Happy birthday to me, Jew boy.
I have a thought experiment for you.
And the alpha males are back. Africans are black. Alpha males are black. Africans are back.
Come on. Come on. Someone needs to pay the price for blasphemy around here.
I am a total pussy.
Oh, God. We're back. Sam Seder, Majority Report. Bradley, Matt in the house. Yesterday, since we were talking about the Supreme Court, yesterday we played a clip of Sheldon Whitehouse talking about the conflict of interest that Clarence Thomas clearly had with his family member working for entities that had cases in front of the Supreme Court. That being his wife and that being January 6th. Whitehouse goes on in that same hearing to lay out all of the ethical violations that Clarence Thomas has appeared to have committed. Now, of course, the Supreme Court says, well, we don't have to respond. But people remember, like, this came up in 2011 as well. The exact same thing. Clarence Thomas's relationship with Harlan Crow. Two judges actually came to testify in regard to it, Scalia and Ginsburg. That was back when the Supreme Court actually cared about its legitimacy. Here is Sheldon Whitehouse just laying out. He's got the receipts.
Hold on. What? There's an audio glitch.
Okay, we have an audio glitch.
I'll get it. Just give me 1 second. I'll get it.
The important thing to understand here is that there's no mechanism. And White House has a piece of legislation that would impose at least a system to adjudicate whether there have been ethics violations. I don't know that it would take would have any enforcement power, but at least it would place out there for our representatives a nonpartisan method of establishing that there has been an ethical violation, and they then could have the opportunity to impeach the justice or whatnot. So you're starting this at 3:15, right? Okay, here it is.
Bill would fix that. Which brings us to Justice Thomas's recent non-disclosure of supposed personal hospitality from a right-wing billionaire and its problems. First problem, private jet travel is not in the personal hospitality exemption, which is limited to food, lodging, and entertainment. Exhibit 7. Some textualist, by the way. Second problem, Thomas said it was okay because he'd asked colleagues. But that Financial Disclosure Committee, it's there to ask about financial disclosure. Setting aside that its name should give a clue, Thomas knew the committee existed because concerns about his yacht and jet travel gifts from this billionaire were referred there in 2011, after some of these gifts were first revealed in this New York Times story, Exhibit 9. Third problem. There's no legal way not to disclose the property acquisition in Georgia. Fourth problem, some of this personal hospitality involved people dedicated to turning the court into a tool for right-wing billionaires, namely Leonard Leo. This guy doesn't have business before the court, his business is the court. This disclosure mess has again been referred to the Financial Disclosure Committee, which raises the question of the previous referral to that same committee of the same billionaire's gifts to Thomas of yacht and jet travel. The rules seem to require the committee to report its findings to the Judicial Conference. The records of the Judicial Conference are public, and the records of the Judicial Conference contain no mention of any such report. So what became of the 2011 referral? Did anyone intervene? Is the committee still considering the 2011 referral more than a decade later? There is much yet to learn, which is why last week I sent a letter to the courts asking for further answers. Exhibit 10. 3 things are needed to fix all this: better enforcement, better recusal rules, and better disclosures. My bill would do all 3. I thank Chairman Durbin for this joint hearing and look forward.
All right. I mean, it is extraordinary. He's saying he didn't know. He asked people. He had been called to court, as it were, on these big, like, not even similar things.
Same guy.
The same guy. It was just less numbers of trips at that point, because that was over a decade ago. And so we're to believe that Clarence Thomas, the Supreme Court Justice, when 2 of his colleagues went in front of the Senate, when there was discussion and a referral of his trips to the Financial Disclosure Committee, that he wasn't aware of any of that? And that's why he didn't do any more disclosures? He wasn't aware that he was like literally called up and publicly talked about? Like the New York Times wrote about this. I mean, I get it. He doesn't want to read the New York Times because it's liberal lies. But it never, you never heard about it? It's unbelievable. They just
literally incredible.
Yeah, just
can't credit it.
Forget about it. I don't need to do it. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? That's basically what he's saying. What are you going to do?
I just forgot to tell the IRS about my literary hangover income. Just forgot.
What are you going to do, dude? My best friend's a billionaire. You want me to disclose this stuff? I'll disclose it. How about this? My billionaire friend's going to pay off everybody. How's that for a disclosure? It's unbelievable. Let's go to the writer's strike. I obviously have some friends in the WGA. I used to be a member of the WGA back in the day when I used to write scripts. I never worked on any type of staffing. It was always a one-off for me in terms of writing this stuff. But the issue ultimately comes down to a couple of things with the Writers Guild. The producers, because the nature of television has changed dramatically from back when I did it, really since the last strike, the nature of television and the business models have changed dramatically. What the producers are basically doing is they are trying to make writers like gig economy workers. And within the context of show business, you've got like production people work on production. And if you're a set dresser, you can work on really any type of production. You can work on a comedy, you can work on a drama, you can work on a movie, you can work on a TV show, you can work on a commercial. It's tough. It's gig after gig after gig after gig. And you never know when your next job is going to come from. But you do have that ability to work on all sorts of types of productions. As an actor, theoretically, you can too, but the fact is, like, if you're a comedic actor, you're not going to get cast in so much in drama as much, and vice versa, and this and that. And you've got to go to auditions that you don't get paid for. It's a full-time job, even when you're not working and getting paid. With writers, the difficulty is that, again, you write a comedy, you're a comedy writer. You're not necessarily going to be working, dramas aren't available to you. And so you make your money in chunks, and it sustains you theoretically through your career. What the producers are trying to do is like squeeze the amount of time and make essentially, not only are people not getting the same amount of money they used to with residuals, even if they were to tomorrow, the producers were to come in and say to writers, okay, you're making, let's just use the numbers, $50. You're making $50 less annually. It's, or 50,000 less annually, whatever it is. We'll pay you extra for the way that for a script. But what they're doing is they're also squeezing the number of days, like the terms. They're trying to switch it from like you get hired on a show and you get a guaranteed 6-month worth of work and you get paid whatever it is, $5,000 a month, let's just say. They're trying to maybe up the dollar amount. Now you'll get paid $6,500 a month. But the producers know also what they have in store for the future is you're not going to get 6 months of work. We're going to make you all do it in a month. Because that is what they have been doing slowly but surely. Squeezing this stuff to make them gig workers. And really undermine any type of security that writers have, because sometimes you can get a job, sometimes you can't. Sometimes a show gets picked up, sometimes it doesn't. And that sort of like gambling part of the business, right? This isn't like we're going in to make, widgets. If the show does well, it'll continue on for a long time. If it doesn't, it won't. That the costs associated with that, they are trying to rejigger who bears that risk more. I mean, make no mistake about it. Producers have always won in that calculation. When you look at the writers as a whole, some writers do really, really well because they're getting on that. But the writers who don't have hit shows or working for years and years on a hit show, they're absorbing the costs associated with this business that is sort of like we're going to put $20 on number 32. And if it comes in, we're all going to get paid. The people who are on all the other numbers of that bet, they're the ones who bear the cost of that. And the producers are trying to squeeze that even more. And on top of which, they won't take a position on whether they'll deploy AI as a mechanism in which to write these shows. And so producers have to do this. I mean, writers have to do this. And one other dynamic that's at play, well, let's play this clip. And this makes the point very well. This is Adam Conover. He did that show, Adam Ruins Everything, right? Yep. And great show. Great for uninitiated people in terms of politics, but even great for people who are into politics. Like, it really tackles amazing issues like antitrust and
housing prices.
Prices. I mean, everything. I don't know where you can find that show.
It was on True TV, I think it was.
It may be, there may be episodes on YouTube, but look for this show, and you will enjoy it. It will help explain things to you, but also I highly recommend it. If you have like family members or younger siblings or, not even, really any age, and you want them to understand it, this is a great show that does that. Natalie Sher used to produce it or write. She was a producer writer on it. Yeah. Just check that show out. But and I think he does. I think he writes on does he write on? I don't know who he writes for now, but nevertheless, he was on a CNN, and this is how he laid it out.
run this industry that say, look, times are changing. We are not making as much money as we once did. This is not the golden era of television, although some of this would argue the shows are great. What do you say to them?
So I'd point out the fact that David Zaslav, the CEO of Warner Brothers Discovery, which is, the parent company of the network I'm talking to you on right now, was paid $250 million last year, $250 million. That's about the same level as what 10,000 writers are asking him to pay all of us collectively, all right? So I would say if you're being paid $250 million, Ted Sarandos made about $50 million last year. These companies are making enormous amounts of money. Their profits are going up. It's ridiculous for them to plead poverty when the writers who are making their shows, some of them are not able to pay their rent or their mortgages. I literally know writers who have had to go on assistance because they have not been able to make their year. If you look at these companies, they're making more money than ever. It's the people who make the shows for them that are making less.
Adam Conover, thank you so much for coming on because you ruined everything. You may have just ruined my career, but I don't mind. Appreciate you coming on and honest.
Good for her.
It's about as well as you can field that.
Yep. But that really is the the essence of the story. And Conover has a podcast I'm being told called Factually with Adam Conover. And people should really check that out.
It's wild.
He also has a Netflix series called The G Word about government operations and agencies. And good for him, Ted Sarandos is probably the guy who signed off on that show, getting called out for his $50 million a year. And the other thing that I've heard is that the producers, what they've done in the past in these strikes, and this is why this strike, you got to expect this to go for a while. The last one went, I think, about 3 or 4 months. I got to tell you, I got a little bit crushed by that strike. I had, I'll tell the story in a second, but one of the things that the production companies, the studios, I should say, like about this is that they have series that they have commitments to, pay to play actors, or pay or play, I should say, actors and maybe producers and et cetera, et cetera. They've made mistakes. The shows are underperforming. They get a chance to cancel the shows, essentially, and not have it look like they effed up. And so this is a way sometimes for these studios to clear the books of some things. So they don't feel the pain until later, which is why I would expect this to go on for a couple of months. And it's going to be hard. Like I say, you've got production people and editors, Matthew Film Guy, I know you're listening, who suffer during this time. But the flip side of that is if they can bring the writers and they can crush the writers, they will crush everybody else too. These strikes are hard. The last one was, I remember the week going into the weekend. Friday, I had sold the show to CBS. I was going to write and direct it. It was going to be a guaranteed pilot. They were generating the paperwork. Monday, go on strike, if I remember correctly. Paperwork never shows. 3 or 4 months later, it's all gone. The executive at CBS who was buying the show was no longer there. I ended up selling it to HBO, but that was not going to go anywhere there. It wasn't the same deal, and they weren't that psyched. But that's what happens.
What was the pinch point to the previous, what were the writers upset about? Like now it's streaming and residuals.
It was residuals at that time too, like cable. The so much of it was cable. It was also expanding who was covered under the auspices of it. I mean, at the time, I had already started at Air America. I've been at Air America for like 3 or 4 years, and so I wasn't, I was just getting back into it because I didn't think I was going to be doing that anymore.
It's just like the way these frames.
And it was different too. I will tell you that there was a lot more dissent amongst the writers. There were much bigger voices who were coming out. Now we'll get a sense in a month or two, but these writers really voted overwhelmingly to strike. And there's no, at the time, like Jon Stewart, I think, tried to do a show without writers. I mean, the level of solidarity. Just because I think there is we talked about this with Jane McAlevey the other day. Like there is just a different perspective towards unions and toward labor relations these days.
And it's depressing how the frames the current frame, like the golden days are over. Shouldn't you just make do with what you can get now? Versus like when things are actually going well, it's like, well, aren't you satisfied with how much you're getting?
Right. I mean, you imagine like anybody saying to an executive, like the golden days are over. Don't you think it's time that maybe you don't make
I would love to
700 times what your average worker does? When was the last time you heard that on corporate media? I'll tell you when. Never. We should maybe get Conover on in the coming weeks.
I think that'd be good.
Maybe on Wednesday or something like that. I am now. Oh wow, it's already 2 o'clock. Okay, folks. Last strike, there was a lot of talk about getting a share of the DVD box sets that were huge at the time. That is also, a big part of the problem is that you very hard to anticipate with over the past 25 years how the industry is going to shake out and where the revenue is coming from. And, again, this is like the same dynamic with like Congress can't anticipate what poison is going to be put into the water. So they just say to the delegate to the EPA, your job is to keep the water clean, and then you figure out what that means. And the disadvantage that labor has in these type of strikes, particularly in terms of like writing, right? Because you go work on a set. This is the way it works. We work 10 hours maximum. We need a 12-hour turnaround or a 9-hour turnaround. There are certain penalties if not. This is what my job is. This is what the expectations are. We want a minimum number of days. But with writing, so much of it is contingent upon the success of the show, which is unpredictable, but also what constitutes success changes through the years. Does success mean it goes 100 episodes and it sells into syndication? Well, it did 25 years ago. That was huge success. Or does success mean that we make 25 episodes and it replays on and on a streaming service? Does it mean that it goes into the DVD sets that I don't know, we don't know in the future where the revenue is going to come from. The corporations have an idea because it's not like nature dictates it. It's like they know where they're going with this stuff. And so they have the advantage in a situation where it is, the pay is contingent upon future revenue. Corporations know where that future revenue is because they're the ones going out and creating the context in which those revenues are developed. And they come up with the instruments in which to get the revenue, and they come up with the accounting in which they attribute revenue to this as opposed to that, even though it might come from both. So the writers are at a big disadvantage relative to the corporations. The only advantage they have is that they're the ones who produce the content, who actually generate the ideas that drive people to watch this stuff. And so really important that there's solidarity across the board.
I'm curious if you guys think whether that some of this platforming or even kind of predictive, some of these predictive statements that people have been talking, at least from like the tech standpoint, I'm wondering if this might seep into culture too, where like some entrepreneurs are like, oh my God, look at the power of AI, so to speak. Like AI could be a huge like journalistic tool. It can write columns, like that type of thing, as another kind of like labor tactic to be like, what if we just get AI to write these shows?
Oh my God!
And then we won't.
Well,
need,
that's always
we won't
existed.
need the writers' room, right?
I mean,
that
that
type of thing.
That's what even Walter Block, when he came onto the show, he's talking like automation is going to take over. I mean, that's what this is.
Because I was thinking about that when it came to the BuzzFeed layoffs recently. Like Jonah Peretti in his statement or his email to his employees basically was like, "We're heavily investing in AI at this point," which to me almost is like you're not saying it outright, but you're probably being like, "How can we essentially just be a content mill without having to pay writers to make it?"
It's how can capitalists cut down on inputs, basically.
Yeah.
Like whether it's like you said, like workers or like graphics computer chip companies are doing special like things to sort of make up for a loss in raw computing power. Like that's what it is.
And it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to replace the entire writing process with AI. You could say, okay, AI, write me a script set in the 2028 about X, Y, and Z, and then you just hire writers to come in on a gig basis to punch it up.
Fill it out.
And pay them like a going rate, like a daily going rate.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. I mean, I have a feeling where they want to get to.
Which is going to be great. All the content's going to be so good then.
Well, the point is, if they're all doing it, then if you can lower the bar of all the content, and then they could also rely on their back catalogs.
Yeah.
But I mean, you hear this with doctors. You hear this with there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of AI can and look, if we get 4-day work weeks because of AI, that's great. But as long as we get the same amount of pay.
Yeah, that's the thing. Is like I think like AI, unlike crypto, which I think when people said it's going to be just like the internet. Like I'm skeptical, but also like the internet, while it has had a magnificent effect on the world, you're still having to work. Like your wages haven't done any better. Like
oh no, yeah,
right.
that is technology is always sold. Like what was that
Keynes?
Was it Bertrand Russell in Praise of Idleness, or just even like that thing that I pulled, I've referenced over the years. I haven't brought it up in a while. That thing I got out of a steamer trunk I bought at a yard sale from like 1962 or 57 or something, where a futurist is going down and talking to some people in Miami. One of his predictions was like, we're going to have TV beamed to little TVs from like basically satellite, like space things in the sky. They're going to beam down to us and we're going to be able to watch it on like our wristwatch. And he said, but they were going to be powered by kerosene.
Awesome, yeah.
But he also said the real question by the time we get to the turn of the century is going to be, how are we going to deal with all the extra leisure time that technology is going to allow?
That's what Keynes
for us?
thought too.
We're going to be at 4-day work week by the 1990s, and the real challenge to society is going to be, what will we do with our leisure time?
Mm-hmm. Give it to the Trump family.
Where is the? You got to get that on your button machine there. Calling from a 347 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from? 347.
Is this me?
Yep. Who are you calling? Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hi, it's Howard. I'm calling from Brooklyn.
Howard from Brooklyn. What's on your mind?
Cool. So I like to talk about AI. I don't know if this was brought up before, but I've been following a lot of what people have been doing with ChatGPT. Yeah. And there's this trend where they're calling it jailbreaking ChatGPT, because you know how like ChatGPT prevents you from requesting certain prompts from them. Like, I don't know, like if it's something raunchy or like inappropriate, they'll say, we can't output that kind of request.
Right.
And there are people who have been able to trick ChatGPT to basically ignore those like whatever locks that the company has on ChatGPT so that they could request these kinds of prompts.
Okay.
And my concern about that, not because they're requesting it, but that this is a practice where it's not really repeatable, because every time someone breaks through this sort of lock, ChatGPT will just update and then prevent them from making those kinds of requests or like those workarounds. And people are legitimately like spending time, like a lot of time, creating these sort of workarounds. And how should I put this? It's like imagine if someone was a software engineer, and by the way, I am a software engineer, which is why this kind of thing is really interesting to me. But if they're a software engineer, imagine if you spend like a day working on something that's not going to work the next day. Like that's, to me, that's a huge waste of time. But it seems like there are people who think that this is a legitimate area of practice or something like that, where they're devoting that effort to get the AI to do something which is not repeatable at all. Like,
I mean,
how sustainable?
Dude, I the only thing I could say is like, it's more of a waste of your time to worry about how these guys are wasting their time.
Well,
Some people may be doing it just for the fun of it, I guess.
You know, the Go Off Kings on Twitch, they've been doing a lot of stuff, and Chris James also, and not even a show, but like, yeah, they'll have I was trying to make Dolly, which is the photo generator one, do like Bernie Sanders in like a attack helicopter or something like that, and they won't do like celebrity figures or something like that. They have like holds in place of that. So you can try to do like old Vermont senator balding in an attack helicopter, like that sort of thing. And it like those sorts of workarounds. Like to me, it does kind of show of like. This is a lot of people wasting time.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's no doubt it's a lot of wasted time. But I imagine there are people like who are doing that just to see how the thing works, right? I mean, isn't that like the equivalent of like, why is that dude taking apart his engine? Mm-hmm. It's not broken. I get the feeling that's what it's about, but I don't know. There's a lot.
I understand. Yeah, I understand that most of it is probably them just like playing around, but like I've seen like I forget which media outlet, but like they were caught using AI to generate their entire news articles. Like it's my concern is really just the rapid adoption of such a tool where it's not really reliable right now.
Oh yeah.
And so
without a doubt,
it's constantly changing. Yeah. And so like even though these particular people are just playing around, there are other people who see this and like, oh, I can use this to like do part of my job for me, and then they develop this whole process to generate these articles.
I'm waiting for the first article. It's probably already happened, where somebody gets ChatGPT or some variation of that to write their will or to write a contract or something like that. And then they go to court, and then the judge is like, you screwed up here.
Yeah, the people that think it can do a really good job on this stuff are people that can't do that job in the first place adequately.
Well, yeah, I mean, I mean, there's going to be times like that, and it's going to get better. But, they did a study, I guess, apparently, where they, like, used the ChatGPT or something to that effect. And they I don't know, they had X number of people with medical complaints engage with the ChatGPT and with a real doctor, and they found like the diagnoses from the ChatGPT were more or less consistent with the doctors, but they found that the ChatGPT was like 45% more empathetic than the doctors. And there's no doubt in my mind that this stuff is going to be deployed before it's ready. I mean, like every other technology, this has happened. I still have emotional scars from getting a Verizon DSL when they first rolled it out and how annoying it was. They rolled it out before it was ready. They do that all the time.
Right.
There's no doubt. No doubt. Appreciate the call. There's
just one thing I want to mention. If you guys know the movie Arrival, right? Like if you check out Ted Chiang's other short stories, he has a short story sort of about AI where like he imagines a future where science research is all conducted by AI, but because of the output, it's so advanced that normal humans don't understand. So then there's another subset of study where humans are trying to interpret the output of the AI in order to understand like what the AI actually generated. And I recommend checking that out because it is a possible future where like if we adopt this technology before it's ready, there might be a scenario where like AI is going to do stuff and we have no idea what it's doing, and now we're on the hook for trying to figure out what it's doing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it goes in the other direction. Thanks for the call. We did an experiment with ChatGPT on Left Reckoning to see if it could pump out a script on Karl Marx's 18th Brumaire of Louis Napoleon. And it was kind of humorous and like sort of did, but then there's like key points of like, okay, it mentions he like wrote a coup de power, but didn't mention that Louis Napoleon was elected president 4 years before that and basically did a self coup to maintain power. Like those are key details that you need in there, and you only know that it's missing if you have the previous experience to identify that. Otherwise, you're like very impressed. Look at this thing, put this out, and I just think like.
But that's a problem also with just historians in general too. Like you could be reading that from somebody else. It's just that the real danger is the tendency for assuming
authority
that ChatGPT is going to have more, is going to be more, is the amalgamation of all the world's wisdom in one entity, as opposed to just another voice that may or may not, is guided by its inputs.
And our inputs is what is actually human beings. So like, I don't think that AIs can advance much beyond human. I think it can basically just reproduce like the best work a human can do, maybe faster, but I don't think it will ever get to the point like in that story he mentioned where it's something we have to decode because it's so far beyond our capacities. Like, I don't think that is, I don't think it's like logically feasible, but I also don't think like you see how much energy a ChatGPT prompt costs, and it's hundreds of times a Google search. Like, I just don't think technically it's possible either.
I don't know. I mean, we have that problem sometimes deciphering like something like Dave Rubin will say or something to that effect.
Yeah, but that's not because it's so advanced.
At least we don't think it is.
I mean, that'd be a really big about face.
Oh my God.
We've misunderstood. David's actually.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am announcing my resignation today because it came to my attention that Dave Rubin is actually a genius.
We were wrong.
Calling from a 308 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, it is Planter Kowalski calling in from the field.
There you go. Planter Kowalski calling in from the fields. Really totally unartificial intelligence. What's happening, Kowalski?
Well, as you can imagine, being alone with your thoughts for 14 hours a day in seclusion gives you time to contemplate things.
No.
And I decided it was a good idea to explain a good Nebraska policy, if you would be interested.
Please.
All right, so we took advantage of this, as in our farm did last year, that you can apply for a program through the Natural Resource Department, Nebraska's NRD, and by doing so, you can get money to put up irrigation pivots. Why does Nebraska's department want you to do that? Well, it would cut down on water usage. So I had a field, it was 80 acres, that's a quarter mile by a half a mile. This thing used to be irrigated with gravity irrigation. The well was 1,000 gallons a minute, and it would have to run for about 10 days straight to water the whole place.
1,000 gallons a minute?
Yeah, pretty standard in this area.
Is it? That's a lot of water.
You would think, but 1 inch of rain across an acre is about 17,000 gallons, and after 3 feet below our feet, you hit nothing but sand and gravel for about 400 feet.
Wow. Okay.
So we have a huge water holding capacity, but even with this massive holding capacity, we still were slowly depleting the aquifer about 2 decades ago. So this program that you can apply for gives you money to help offset the cost of investing in a irrigation pivot. By doing so, we can now irrigate the place in 3 days instead of 10, and instead of 1,000 gallons a minute, it's a 600 gallon a minute high pressure well. So as you can imagine, that is a lot less water. This has been good for a few reasons. First and foremost, it cuts down on the water usage, which is great. It's much better for the environment, which, is what got a lot of the environmentalists on board with it. Nebraska is the #1 producer of center irrigation pivots in the world. The 4 biggest manufacturers are all right here in Nebraska, so it's good for our local economy. It's good for the farmers who put it up because, it means less work for us since we can just, turn on a pivot instead of having to lay out irrigation pipe, and it gives you more options if you say you have a dry spring, because you can't do anything with your gravity systems during a dry spring. On the far end of it, Nebraska's tax revenue goes up because these are considered property improvements. And if your property improves, that means you now are going to be paying more in property taxes. So the state recoups its money it invested into this program to begin with in the long run. It is what your guys' half or your fund half would call a win-win-win. And this is a good program. Overall, it has almost no downside as far as I can find.
Wow. All right. Well, good. I mean, I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop. But Kowalski calling in with some good news, a good example of government functioning well.
And thank you for the drink container, Kowalski.
Oh yeah, I brought the snake thing back to Saul, and he's like, "You already told me about this." So he didn't.
That's funny.
He didn't get as shocked as I was. What do you put in the ground right now? What's the ground temperature, and what are you waiting for?
Currently, it's been hovering in the low 40s, so we are good to go. I'm planting corn right now. We finished our beans 2 days ago. The last 5 days, I've gotten, monitor says, 710 acres planted.
Wow.
Ain't bad.
Wow. And it doesn't matter what the ground temperature is? It doesn't, 40 degrees is okay for corn?
It's not going down anymore. The way the forecast looks, we're green light from here on out. So
beautiful.
Yeah, as soon as it heats up, you're good. But yeah, I just
what
thought I
about
would talk about
Japanese
this
sweet
program.
potatoes? What's the ground temperature you need for that to put that in the ground? Do you plant those?
I'm not sure, but since those are from South America, I would imagine you would need to be north of 45.
All right, fair enough. You just put those slips right in the ground. I've got a bunch of sweet potato slips growing on my windowsill.
Well, I wouldn't know much about the New York growing cycle. I mean, a lot of this stuff is region specific. So, I mean, as perfect as Nebraska is, it does not mean I know what needs to happen in New York.
All right, fair enough. Kowalski, thanks so much for the call.
All right, you all have a good one.
Folks, we're going to take the final call right now. The day. We just don't have that much time. I just spent too much time on the Supreme Court. I don't know what to tell you. Calling from a 616 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from? You're the final caller of the day. Because I got a couple other things to talk about.
I'm stoked. 1 sec, I just have to get to a room because I'm in my office. This is me, right?
Yes. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Oh, man, this feels awesome. Okay. Long-time listener, first-time caller. Nick from Michigan.
Nick from Michigan.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Just want to say I really appreciate everything you guys do, from covering the big picture stuff to covering local stuff. I think it's super important.
Thank you.
And as someone who grew up in a libertarian household, I just want to say I'm calling in to argue about the ethics of the age of consent laws. I'm just kidding. No, my dad's a libertarian, and so I've been using your arguments to argue with him whenever he tries to bring that stuff up. But yeah, the part of Michigan I'm in is a pretty conservative area, but I think I think us younger people, we're really, being more progressive and stuff. And I think the important thing is so many people are worrying about like the presidential election and like Joe Biden and stuff when there's really not much we can do on the presidential level as progressives right now. And I think it's super important to focus more on the local stuff. Like when we're seeing all this stuff happening with the state legislatures, like in Tennessee and Montana. And I think it's important to shine a light on what's happening there. So, yeah, I guess I don't have a major question.
Well, I tend to
great work, guys.
I mean, I tend to agree with you, and certainly Michigan has had, I wouldn't call, I don't know what I would call what's happening in Michigan, progressive yet, but at the very least, that it is turning, blue, and the way that you get to, something that's really more progressive is it becomes an argument between two different wings of of people who vote for Democrats, essentially.
Oh yeah, like I mean, I'm in Hillary Schulten's district, and I prefer someone else, but she's a lot better than Peter Meyer.
Yep.
And then I mean, just like a general trend. So like when we moved to the area, like my public school had like a giant mural of Noah's Ark, and we moved from New York. And my mom started like a committee to secularize the public school systems here. And she initially got a lot of flack, but then she started getting a ton of support.
Interesting.
So I think that's where you're kind of getting like the more progressive stuff, where people are starting to, realize, at least in West Michigan, that not everybody's a WASP,
Appreciate the call.
Yeah, thanks so much.
All right, folks, that finishes the call-in portion of our program. So this came out. I am super, super skeptical as to why we are getting all of these leaks of Tucker Carlson. I do not believe the story that this is about, Rupert Murdoch going like, oh my God, he's a Christian nationalist, white supremacist. Oh dear.
Croggy.
What? How did this happen? Here is a text that was supposedly Fox just found. I remember this is a week after he's been fired, and they're like, Fox is clearly on a campaign to come up with a reason that is unique to Tucker Carlson as to why they fired Tucker Carlson. This is not a campaign to get their viewers to like okay it, because their viewers know exactly who Tucker Carlson was. That's why they watched him. This is something else. This is a message sent to one of his producers in the hours after Trump supporters stormed the Capitol on January 6th, 2021. It's the next day. It could be actually, 4:18 p.m. UTC. What is UT? I don't even know what the UTC is.
That'll be 12 Eastern time.
Okay, so it is the day after January 6th at 12 Eastern time. What is UTC?
12:18 Universal
Coordinated
time.
Universal time.
Oh,
The primary
weird.
time standard by which the world regulates clocks and time.
Like
We don't know who this was, who he was texting to.
We don't know who he was texting at the time.
But it's supposedly a producer, according to the Times. A couple of weeks ago, I was watching video of people fighting on the street in Washington. A group of Trump guys surrounded an Antifa kid, started pounding the living shit out of him. It was 3 against 1 at least. Jumping a guy like that is dishonorable, obviously. It's not how white men fight. Yet suddenly I found myself rooting for the mob against the man, hoping they'd hit him harder, kill him. I really wanted them to hurt the kid. I could taste it. Then somewhere deep in my brain, an alarm went off. This isn't good for me. I'm becoming something I don't want to be. The Antifa creep is a human being. As much as I despise what he says and does, Much as I'm sure I'd hate him personally if I knew him, I shouldn't gloat over his suffering. I should be bothered by it. I should remember that somewhere somebody probably loved this kid and would be crushed if he was killed. If I don't care about those things, if I reduce people to their politics, how am I better than he is? Well, of course you've reduced him to his politics because that's where you get all the assumptions about him just because he's an Antifa person and you're assessing him based upon the fact that he's on the opposite end of some Proud Boys fists. But the big issue here, of course, is that apparently Fox was really upset about hearing it's not how white men fight. Right? You wouldn't do 3-on-1. That's not how white men fight. This is from, I don't know, about 15 years ago. News commentator Tucker Carlson had been on an episode of MSNBC Live. That was when he worked on MSNBC. That aired August 28th. To having assaulted a man who he said bothered him in a Washington, D.C. restroom when he was in high school. Statement came amid discussion of the recent scandal involving Idaho Senator Larry Craig's arrest for lewd conduct in an airport's men room. When host Dan Abrams asked Carlson how Carlson responded to the incident, Carlson said, I went back with someone I knew and grabbed the guy by the, and grabbed him and hit him against the wall with his head, actually, and then the cops came and arrested him. Now, I don't know if this is true or not, that story he told, but he basically told the story of like two white guys.
Teaming up.
100% sure that the guy that Tucker Carlson got was a white guy.
I'll put my money on,
to go gay bash a guy whom they then subsequently got arrested for being on the wrong end of two guys beating on him. Now, I don't know if I believe that with Tucker Carlson, but at the very least, it's how he imagined white guys to fight at that time. Maybe he's gotten a little bit more racist in that he's developed this notion of how white guys fight. But the idea that this is why Fox News fired him, I'm sorry. The guy said stuff like this on his show on a weekly, if not monthly basis. And on top of which, cue up number 12. If this bothers Fox News, wait till they get a load of this guy.
Of them. The mayor here is complaining about a couple thousand with more resources than any other city in the entire country. That's ridiculous. Now, I saw on the way into work a illegal immigration family digging through the trash looking for recyclables.
How did you know they were illegal?
You can tell.
Okay, done. I mean, you can tell. Now, when they give Jesse Waters the APM slot, which I'd say there's a 50-50 chance, honestly. Are they going to go like, we just found out that Waters is incredibly bigoted?
How down?
How did that happen? You know what they're doing now at that 8 p.m. slot, which is amazing because I've seen like conservatives defend who's the guy, the name of the guy. They've got a black guy who's I don't know
Lawrence Jones.
Lawrence Jones. I guess he's a Weekend guy.
Yeah,
I'm not familiar with him at all.
Yeah.
And I've seen like right wingers saying like this is affirmative action. I thought Fox didn't believe about it, like Fox fans, and then other people defending this guy. It's amazing. But what they're doing, just to be clear, is I think this is like an indication to me that they want to put Jesse Waters in there. And I'll tell you why. Because you don't want to put Jesse Waters in after Tucker because it is too on the nose. It is too much like he's supposed to be a different version of Tucker Carlson. So what you do is you put in someone who's completely different from Tucker to completely like get rid of the expectations of the audience at that hour so that there's not a comparison, a direct comparison to someone who is so closely like Tucker. I'm going to bet that's what's going on there. Like they're not putting like a Megyn Kelly in that spot. They're going to put someone in there who they think is, very, very similar to Tucker, but we need a little bit of distance so that similarity, it's not a direct comparison. That's my guess. But the idea that Tucker was fired because of this, impossible. This leads me to believe that they are afraid of some other exposure regarding Tucker, and it may be that Grossberg suit. That's my sense of what's going on there.
Appears that Tucker was lying about never having interacted with Grossberg.
Oh yeah, he claims that he never interacted with her, and she's been producing now. Do we have a is that sound clip there? Of where Grossberg, what is it that we have from Grossberg?
This was her saying that he tried to broker the speaker race with on air, live on air.
Oh, okay. All right. We'll get to that in a second then. But no, Grossberg, we don't need to do. She's already released the text. It's quite clear that he had direct, and I think that the Fox felt like there was so much exposure there that they fired him as a way to get him as far away as possible from the company and sort of project we had no idea what was going on. I mean, here's why I think they're lying about that. In the New York Times article written about this text that it was leaked to, paragraph buried deep in the New York Times article, it remains unclear how the text escaped more notice earlier, given that the Fox legal team was aware of it and other offensive texts written by Mr. Carlson. In other words, these texts came from the legal team collecting all this information to provide for discovery, and before they hand it over to Dominion, they go over it so that they know what they're handing over. Fox's lawyers had produced the text as part of the discovery process and were involved in the redactions. Mr. Carlson had even been asked about it during a deposition, according to several people who have read the unredacted transcripts of his deposition. So Fox is not surprised by this stuff. Maybe they didn't want to fire him going into the Dominion suit. Although, I don't know what it has to do with Dominion. It was not guaranteed that the text would have been revealed in open court. I mean, it could have been by Dominion. They hadn't, the Dominion's lawyers had still not decided whether they would introduce the text in front of the jury, according to people with knowledge of their plans. So in other words, this information would have never come out about Tucker. It's Fox trying to sort of step back from Tucker for some reason that is unclear. Who are they kidding? This is their brand. Do they not remember Bill O'Reilly? They never fired Bill O'Reilly because he went up to, what was it? I can't remember the place in Harlem. He went up to a famous
Sylvia's?
Yes, he went to Sylvia's, and he's like, I was really surprised. I thought it was all going to be mofo this and pass me the
MF or I want more iced tea.
Yeah, MF or I want more iced tea. And I was shocked. People were just normal. That's not why they fired Bill O'Reilly. They fired Bill O'Reilly because it was paying out millions of dollars in sexual harassment claims. They don't care about racism at Fox News, other than to say, we need to hit our quota of racism or our ratings are going to go down.
And the Democrats are doing it against white people.
I mean, there's something else going on there. I'm surprised at the complete lack of skepticism by the mainstream media about this stuff. They so desperately want Fox to actually be a real news outlet. Honestly, it's
sad.
It's pathological. It's pathological. Here is Tucker Carlson's former producer, Abby Grossberg. She's on with Anderson Cooper. Just to give you a sense, people say this rather glibly, but it's been true for some time now. Fox News is the media wing of the Republican Party. Now, you could make arguments that MSNBC does that to some degree with the Democratic Party, and probably more so now than in the past. But the level of coordination, I can assure you, does not get to this level whatsoever. They may, provide more like Democratic establishment voices on MSNBC, and some of them may be lame in asking them questions. And their politics are probably more simpatico than the left of the party. But the idea that there is like this type of coordination, no. Here is Abby Grossberg talking about Tucker brokering who would be their next speaker.
Persona.
Yeah. I mean, they believed that he could broker who was speaker, House Speaker. He wanted to do that live on air, but Kevin McCarthy said no.
What do you mean he wanted to do that live on air?
His plan was to have Kevin McCarthy come on the show, according to Justin Wells revealed this grand plan to us. Tucker, a few days earlier, had sort of set some terms for McCarthy, which included this church kind of committee that he said about, I think this was about January 5th, so about January 2nd, he said, you should have this church committee. So fast forward to January 5th, they start asking me to book McCarthy on the show that night. I had worked with him a lot when I was at Sunday Morning Futures and had a relationship with his team. That afternoon, Justin came in and he said, here's the plan. Tucker's going to first have Kevin on, hear him beg and grovel. Then we'll bring in Matt Gaetz, and Matt Gaetz will then kind of set his terms. Then Tucker will set his terms that McCarthy has to agree to.
Tucker Carlson had terms that
Had
McCarthy
terms,
had
yeah,
to agree
had
to.
terms. And we're going to make this whole thing happen on air and save the Republican Party. Now, fortunately, for McCarthy's sake, he said no. But he did call Tucker the next day from his office with Representative Thomas Massie and had agreed to some of Tucker's terms, according to a text that Tucker had sent me. And he said that was a win.
Prior to working for Carlson, you worked on Maria Bartiromo.
I mean, this reminds me, there was a congressman once, it was one of the first ones from Georgia. This was about around 2008. He said something against Rush Limbaugh, and then the next day he had to call in and beg for forgiveness on air. The idea that their party is not just like in coordination with, but is literally led by, first it was Rush Limbaugh. I used to say he is the intellectual, he is the underpinning of the party. Tucker Carlson was really like literally almost like its titular leader. Unbelievable. And this is the problem with the Republican Party. They are run by Fox News viewers, and the Fox News viewer shepherd can dictate to an entire political party, what they should do. And you look at what else is on Fox News. Frat boy saying, I know they were illegal immigrant. I could tell by looking at them. And the story, of course, is also like crime is rampant. You've got families of people digging through the trash for recyclables. Never mind, like the reaction that a lot of people would have is like, oh my God, we've got to help people if they're having to, like, as a family, dig through the trash for recyclables to make, enough money to eat at 5 cents a bottle. This is what it is. All right, let's go to some IMs. Check this out, though, guys. Somebody just sent me this, and I don't know what it is. Somebody says it's Tucker after the deposition, says Militant Apathy. Check that out and see what that is. In the meantime, Stephen Crowder's boob job. Consolidation shenanigans afoot regarding the USPS. Please look into the background of the two USPS board nominees appointed by Biden last year. One is a former Trump administration official. Jesus. Ryan and Callie. My dad was a legendary animator. He was even head of his local in the 1960s. He hated it because he was a pro-boss. It was a pro-boss union. For most of his 50-plus career, he worked as an independent contractor, i.e. gig worker. His pension when he retired, $69 a month. Hey. Katie Sheppy. Hello, everyone. Finally got a new job. Safe housing. Can I get a shofar? You can. Appreciate the show as a constant comfort throughout all the moving and long work hours. Left is best. I'm glad you do. DC letter carrier. Did you see your friend PBD offered Tucker Carlson a $50 million deal? I did, yeah. Majority Report wardrobe coordinator. If the WGA goes on strike, it has. How is Fox News going to make up things for boomers to get mad at? Henry, have you seen the text found from the Dominion Discovery Cucker? Yes. I think if you can crack streaming, if they can crack streaming in the new contract, Netflix would have much clearer and better disclosures. Big streams just announced their numbers, but we always have to trust them. This could finally be the equalizer in the streaming wars. I don't know about that. Sam Garbled Syntax. Hey, MR Crew. You guys or Nomiki? Who ghosted who? Well, I mean, I think it was pretty clear, like when she ran, that she was not going to be on the show, and then I don't want to relitigate all that. DMT cop. Good news. Jesse Brown of Indianapolis City Council, District 13, was elected as the primary candidate last night. This is a huge step towards breaking the hog-set political machine in Indiana, or in Indianapolis, rather. Left his best. Noble villain. Ask Tucker how good his right-wing Mandela was. We should at least vet his credentials first. Oh, that was after I offered $200 million. Dave from Jamaica. White men know for honorable fighting. I am convinced Murdoch fired Carlson over his wife being obsessed with him. I guess that's conceivable, but I'm not sure I buy that either. Yeah. I mean, wouldn't you want control over this guy? Right. Did you watch that thing I just IM'd you?
Yeah, it looks. I can't tell if it's. I want to see if it's actually from Media Matters or if it's some CGI thing.
Okay.
But it looks like there's some sort of behind the scenes footage.
Fruity Dinosaur. In the vein of what the caller said about moving out of New York to go to Michigan, I argue with people about leaving Wisconsin somewhat regularly. What doing so abandons the remaining people. What we need is more people moving to red states to change it. Plays into the demographics fear-mongering that we've seen, but it's a genuine strategy that could be implemented. True. Illuminati kids. The caller is implying he frequently has to argue with his dad about age of consent laws. I guess I'll just say I'm glad that subject has never come up with mine. Jarek, you should update the sponsors page on the MR website. You're absolutely right. You should definitely do that. Juniper J. From what I understand, the legitimacy of SCOTUS is based on two things. One is 9 sentences in Article 3 that define the court. The other is public acceptance that the court decisions are fair and not partisan. That is mostly gone. I would agree. Jeff from South Jersey. This is too much. This is too long, but I'll read some of this. I'm a current psychologist whose fiance is also a mental health counselor. I appreciate the way you guys have explained flaws in the mental health care system and limitations of mental health awareness campaigns. When I assist friends seeking mental health resources, I find a few things helpful within the current system. Firstly, if someone doesn't have insurance, I recommend they do their best to obtain it through the Affordable Care Act or other options. Once someone has insurance, it's helpful to utilize their insurance provider's website or app to locate in-network therapists or doctors. Platforms like ZocDoc can also be helpful for finding providers in-network. I also caution people to be wary of online mental health services advertised frequently, such as BetterHelp or Talkspace. While they may be an option, they don't always have the best track record or practices and can be costly out of pocket. Finally, when it comes to medication, psychiatrists can be an option, but they tend to have limited availability and can be costly if they're out of network. Other providers, such as psychiatric nurse practitioners or primary care providers, can also be knowledgeable about medications for mental health concerns and cost much less than psychiatrists. Wish I had some better advice, but this is unfortunately the system we have. Sock Demento, they don't have to be clever. They'll just make it up to serve the capitalists. Left is best. 5 more of these. Sam's barely contained rage. No AirPods on calls. That's all in caps. Professional dumpster fire. Adam has actually done a progressive left shift. And his podcast, Fractionally, is covering AI, social media, and antitrust amazingly well. Wasn't he always left?
Yeah, no, that's the thing about Adam Ruins Everything is like it appears just like a normal like a TLC style Mythbuster show.
Yeah, I got the sense that his politics were left, but he was trying to present it in a non-ideological way.
Smart.
Because of who his audience was and probably who the show was. In all honesty, if I were in that position, I would do exactly the same.
I can say, like, having gone from a generic, there's a reason it's always the Ben Shapiro show or the Candace Owens show instead of, and why we did the Michael Brooks show versus Left Reckoning is because it changes the show. When it's just the Michael Brooks show, it's like, it can be a whole bunch of different things. It doesn't. Well,
that is not the reason why he had a different. He came to me with a different name. He had a couple of names he was recommending, ones, and I was like, dude, just call it the Michael Brooks show.
And that's the smart way to do it.
Yeah. Air America had this problem in that it branded itself as a left of center network, and really it should have just done independent media.
Right, and then people can get that themselves.
Yeah. Fox News, I mean, now maybe they're in the business where they have to sort of like say, we're more conservative than the other, but they built that house on fair and balanced. Right. That's what they built there. We report, you decide.
I mean, I think that's one of the, like, I probably read Jacobin more, but Current Affairs doing it, like, that branding is genius. Just Current Affairs.
Right. Chris Burdick. I keep thinking back to the 1988 Oscars, which they decided to go ahead with despite being in the middle of a writer's strike, and boy, did it show. Unwatchable debacle, top to bottom. My most vibrant memory of it was this Dudley Moore, Liza Minnelli musical number that was just utter cringe. I post to social media now and again. It's so hilariously bad. I don't think that would happen again. I do not think. If I had to bet, when is the Oscars? It's already passed, right? Yeah. Is there any type of award show coming up? Tony's wouldn't be an issue. I don't know, but I will be very surprised.
Emmys is in September, so I guess that who's to say?
It's not inconceivable. Yeah. MSNBC there. Sam, think of the elevator operators. Check and automate. Nice. Ben from Chicago. There's another sci-fi series about an AI that comes up with answers that its creators don't understand. Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Lick butts, not boots. Hey, Sam, are Henson razors good for private bits? Well, I mean, I would imagine. Serious business. By all accounts, the Michigan GOP is in the process of imploding. They've burned through all their funds. Their current leader is still trying to push the big lion. No one is having it, even the local GOP. So I'm hoping DSA folks in the legislature don't rest on their laurels and keep pushing more good laws over the finish line. Mark Monkey, I stand by believing that Tucker being fired has to do with something that implicates the higher-ups. O'Reilly didn't get fired for the assault of finding out about the settlements. He got fired when the stories came out about how his behavior was consistent with management and ownership. That's a good point. Lucky for Ailes, he was dead when those stories came out, but I'm sure the digging continued. I'm sure it would implicate Hyatt people. That's a very good theory. All right, 2 more. Kyle from Montreal predicting that Sarah Paulson is going to be cast as Abby Grossberg in the eventual Ryan Murphy miniseries about Fox News. And the final IM of the day. Tim from Minneapolis. Adam Ruins Everything was really good for my teenage niece to get solid political information. It's also just great entertainment. You guys, tomorrow when Emma's here, are going to have to go over Steven Crowder showing his pay to everybody as part of one of the benefits of working at Louder with Crowder. We tried to institute that policy here as part of the benefits package. Bradley, Matt, great job today. I will see you guys on Friday, and we'll be here tomorrow. Bye-bye.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the light bar, but finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. I get somewhere the choice was made, for the option where you don't get paid, for the road that bends before it finally breaks you. I guess somehow I lost my drive between the 101 and the 5. Do you know how far the detour takes you? Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the